Have you ever thought about how a single poor choice or a seemingly harmless action could result in a tragic outcome? Picture a couple going kayaking on one of the most dangerous days of the year. What was meant to be a fun adventure turned into a shocking incident. Where does the boundary lie between truth and error? Angelica's story illustrates how an unforeseen series of events can alter someone's life permanently. The Hudson Valley is a perfect location for outdoor activities, attracting those who seek adventure with its beautiful scenery and rushing river. Kayaking is a popular choice for thrill seekers, but the river can be unforgiving. Even experienced kayakers can make mistakes. Angelica Grewald and Vincent Viafor loved being on the water. For them, it represented freedom and connection. On the evening of April 19, 2015, they excitedly ventured out onto the Hudson River once more. Both were seasoned adventurers, but that day, the river presented unexpected challenges. Strong winds created rough waves. Although they felt a strong urge to turn back, they chose to continue. Their goal was to reach an island featuring a castle inspired by Scottish architecture, a place that always captivated them with its mysterious and ancient charm. They spent the day enjoying nature, but everything changed as evening approached. The strong waves and cold water were warning signs, but they had no choice but to return. Staying on the island without proper equipment for the night was too dangerous. When Vincent's kayak started taking on water, things turned tragic. Without a life jacket and in the freezing water, Vincent faced a life-threatening situation. Shocked, Angelica called emergency services. She desperately explained that she couldn't reach him because of the powerful waves and that the current was pulling him away. The dispatcher had difficulty locating them, making the situation even worse. Time was running out, and every second mattered. By the time rescuers arrived, Vincent had already gone under the water, and he could not be found. The darkening sky added to the grim atmosphere of the ordeal. Let's explore more about Angelica. At 35, she was an ambitious woman focused on her passion for photography, which she envisioned as her future. Originally from Latvia, she left her home country in search of a better life, having gone through 2 marriages and 2 divorces. Despite these challenges, her goal was clear: to settle in the US, acquire a work visa, and establish a career. Her fortune changed when she secured a job as a nanny and moved to the United States. Significant changes in her life began when she met Vincent. At 46, Vincent had experienced 2 divorces and was thriving in the construction industry. Despite their age difference, his relationship with Angelica developed rapidly. Vincent was known for his generosity, often hosting parties and bringing friends together, which made his life vibrant. It was during one of these events that he met Angelica. Within weeks, she moved into his house in Poughkeepsie, New York. Their relationship progressed quickly, with discussions of marriage and starting a family becoming common. However, underlying problems began to surface, growing more serious in the days leading up to the tragic event. On April 18, 2015, the day before the accident, Vincent and Angelica went to a party. Vincent enjoyed himself with friends, but Angelica left early, saying she felt unwell. She didn't interact much with others and appeared distant. Vincent's friends noticed some tension between them, leading to a minor disagreement. Despite this, nothing significant occurred that night, and they parted ways, only to reunite the next morning. Vincent then talked about his plans for kayaking, eager to resolve their issues, spend time together on the Hudson River. Let's revisit that tragic day. Despite the cold and increasing winds, Angelica agreed to the plan. They intended to visit Bannerman Island in the river for a photo shoot. Angelica had prepared elegant outfits for a variety of shots, hoping to capture beautiful images. By noon, they arrived at the water's edge, eager for the adventure ahead, but the strengthening winds hinted at trouble. Large waves began to rise around them, making the chilly air feel even more oppressive. Although Angelica was aware of the deteriorating weather, Vincent's love for adventure and his stubbornness convinced them to press on. Just before they began, Vincent said something Angelica would never forget: "This will be the adventure of your life." Those words would soon take on a haunting significance. The journey to the castle went well. Later, Angelica told the police that they had both enjoyed a couple of beers to relax before they left. They were aware they needed to stay sober for their return trip. However, things took a turn on the way back. Vincent started to lag behind as the waves became stronger, shouting that his kayak was filling with water. Angelica turned to look and saw his kayak sinking. She attempted to go back to him, but the tidal current pushed her toward the shore. Once she reached land, she called emergency services, but by then, Vincent had already vanished into the cold waters of the Hudson River. On the evening of April 19, 2015, a search began that continued through the night and into the following day. Divers entered the murky waters of the Hudson River looking for Vincent's body, while a sonar-equipped boat struggled with fog and rough waves. Rescue helicopters searched the area, but all efforts were unsuccessful. Vincent's family was in shock and panic, trying to cope with the tragedy. His loved ones and friends held on to a glimmer of hope that he had somehow survived despite the freezing water and strong current, but they also understood the likelihood was very low. 10 days after her fiancé disappeared, Angelica Grewald returned to Bannerman Island with flowers in hand. The police were there too, not to comfort Angelica, but to confront her. During the confrontation, she mentioned that she might have accidentally taken out the drain plug from Vincent's kayak on their way back. This detail changed the direction of the investigation significantly. Now, there were more questions than answers, and the initial belief that Vincent's death was just an accident began to seem unlikely. Angelica also informed the detectives that Vincent's paddle was damaged. It had lost a locking ring, making it difficult to use. This raised further suspicions, leading investigators to wonder if Angelica had deliberately arranged for Vincent to drown, given the broken paddle and missing plug. However, the motive for such an act was unclear, leaving the overall situation feeling unresolved. Investigators sought to understand Angelica's possible motives by contacting people who knew both her and Vincent. They reached out to Angelica's ex-boyfriend, Michael Colvin, with whom she had lived several years prior. Michael was surprised to hear about the allegations against Angelica, but acknowledged that he couldn't completely dismiss the possibility. He shared that, despite her calm demeanor, she had a darker side. When they had been drinking, Angelica could become confrontational and start fights, which Vincent, according to Michael, would endure silently. Notably, just weeks before the incident, Vincent told a friend he was seriously reconsidering their engagement. He characterized Angelica as manipulative and aggressive, especially when she lost her temper. During questioning, Angelica acknowledged that there were conflicts in her relationship with Vincent, but she insisted that these issues were only related to their personal lives. However, her unclear statements and vague responses raised suspicions among the detectives. Increasingly, the evidence suggested that Vincent's death might not have been an accident, but rather a well-planned event. The motive for his death turned out to be more significant than initially thought. In addition to the relationship problems and anger, Angelica had a strong financial motive. She was the main beneficiary of Vincent's life insurance policy, which was worth about $250,000. This large amount of money could resolve her financial difficulties and provide her with a new beginning. At that time, Angelica was unemployed. This money could dramatically alter her future. The new information changed Angelica's status from grieving fiancé to the main suspect in the case. Despite this, she maintained her innocence. Nevertheless, the prosecution accused her of second-degree criminal wrongdoing, leading to her arrest, with bail set at $9 million, an amount that was beyond her financial means as a foreign national. Concerns that she might try to escape resulted in her being held in custody while waiting for her trial. Her defense team argued that her comments during an 11-hour interrogation should not be considered legally valid. Her attorney highlighted that Vincent's body had not yet been found and, without forensic evidence, it was impossible to prove any wrongdoing. He contended that Vincent's death was a tragic accident, suggesting that his kayak capsized due to a wave, and that a loose drain plug might have contributed to the drowning when the kayak started sinking. Vincent's body had not yet been found, but the investigation was progressing. A key issue was the drain plug, a small opening no larger than a fingertip. It seemed incredible that such a tiny detail could lead to such a tragedy. The drain opening on Vincent's kayak was positioned on the top, which made it unlikely that it could have allowed enough water in to sink the kayak. As concerns mounted, Angelica's lawyer pushed for additional tests to help clarify the situation. A precise simulation was performed using the same kind of kayak and a man who matched Vincent's weight and size. The results indicated that even with the drain plug removed, the kayak did not take on water quickly enough to tip over. The drain hole only let in a small trickle of water, merely drops that wouldn't have led to a serious accident. This suggests that even without the plug, Vincent's kayak could have easily traveled the remaining mile or so to shore. Furthermore, the attorney pointed out that Vincent had been drinking, which might have affected his coordination and reaction time. The combination of a flooded kayak, questionable confessions, and the water experiments led to intense discussions. When the experiments appeared to completely contradict the theory about the plug, the prosecution shifted its attention to the paddle. Angelica claimed the paddle was damaged and missing a locking ring, which investigators thought might have impacted Vincent's ability to control the kayak. However, the defense countered this by showing that the missing ring did not impair the paddle's performance. It was still sturdy, usable, and fully operational. Despite this, it was significant that during her interrogation, Angelica confessed to touching both Vincent's paddle and the plug, which ultimately led to the charges against her. To the police, this appeared to be a meticulously planned crime. Even minor actions, like touching the paddle or brushing against the plug, were seen as reasons to suspect Angelica of intentional wrongdoing. However, despite the prosecution's convincing story, the defense remained resolute. Angelica's lawyer argued that her statements were obtained under emotional stress during the interrogation. They brought in an expert on false confessions, who analyzed all 11 hours of recorded questioning and found that the police applied significant psychological pressure. The expert stated that the detectives used classic techniques to force a confession. They asked leading questions, alternated between being friendly and aggressive, did not give her time to think, and pressured her to repeat phrases that fit their version of events. During the interrogation, Angelica often seemed confused, giving vague answers and displaying fluctuating emotions. An expert claimed she was in shock, suggesting that her statements should be viewed with caution. The detectives focused on her brief comment about sometimes wanting to be free from the relationship, interpreting this as a sign she might intend to harm Vincent. The defense argued that this statement had no direct relevance to the incident, it simply referred to their ongoing relationship problems. Angelica was discussing freedom in a general sense, but the police interpreted her words differently. The interrogation expert pointed out that Angelica never mentioned crime or death in that context, and her statements were influenced more by the investigators than reflecting the actual truth. However, the detectives ignored these nuances and dismissed any further comments from Angelica once they heard what they wanted. The defense claimed that Vincent's kayak had problems well before the incident, particularly with a faulty drain plug that had been an issue for months. Angelica mentioned that they had kayaked without the plug several times without any major issues. Although the river conditions that day were perilous, the defense argued that the bad weather caused the tragedy, not any deliberate actions. However, the prosecution maintained a strong position, believing that everything pointed to a woman dissatisfied with her relationship, plotting an accident to obtain insurance money and seek independence. Angelica's interrogation seemed to go on forever. She lost track of time and felt trapped. Initially, she tried to stay firm, but as the police kept returning to the topic of the drain plug, her confidence began to crumble. Her explanations about whether the plug was present became confusing, and the investigators seized on this confusion. The situation changed when a visibly exhausted Angelica requested to leave and feed her cat. Tears filled her eyes, and this display of vulnerability prompted the detectives to escalate their tactics. The pressure mounted as they bombarded her with leading questions. Although she never explicitly admitted to any crime, the police persisted. The expert who later reviewed the interrogation footage noted that Angelica appeared fatigued and overwhelmed, indicating she wasn't in a clear state of mind. Her inconsistent answers were signs of emotional exhaustion, not a deliberate confession of guilt. According to the expert, she was desperate to end the relentless questioning, which resulted in her providing several vague responses that the police used against her. Vincent's body remained missing, causing great distress for his family and friends. Their suffering continued to deepen until May 23, 2015, almost a month after his disappearance, when a boater found his body in the Hudson River near Bannerman's Island, the same location the couple had visited on the day of the incident. The autopsy revealed that he died from drowning, with no signs of foul play or struggle. Although Vincent's blood had traces of alcohol, the levels were not significant, indicating that he was primarily affected by severe weather and cold water. A few days after the body was discovered, Vincent's kayak was recovered. The drain plug was missing, and as expected, the paddle did not have the locking ring, but this did not impede its use. The defense argued that no single factor caused the drowning. Instead, it was the combination of various circumstances: cold water, strong winds, no life jacket, and the influence of alcohol. They maintained that this combination led to the tragedy, not any actions by Angelica. Meanwhile, the prosecution remained firm in their stance, highlighting inconsistencies in Angelica's statements as proof of her involvement in Vincent's death. Their theory suggested that she deliberately tampered with the kayak to ensure Vincent would not survive. In contrast, Angelica's lawyer contended that it was a tragic accident caused by Vincent's own reckless behavior. He chose to go out on the water while intoxicated, without a life jacket, and in dangerous weather. Despite knowing the risks of surviving in the icy water were minimal, he decided to take that chance. Although Angelica insisted she was innocent, the case changed when the prosecution recognized that charging her with intentional harm would be difficult. Actions like removing a drain plug or breaking a paddle were too convoluted to be seen as criminal, which likely wouldn't persuade a jury. Additionally, the defense presented strong arguments, with experts affirming that a tragic accident could occur in those circumstances. The prosecution reached a deadlock and offered Angelica a plea deal. They asked her to plead guilty to manslaughter by negligence, which would lead to a shorter prison sentence of a few years instead of a life sentence. On July 24, Angelica Grewald broke down in tears as she accepted a guilty plea to manslaughter by negligence. As a result, Angelica was sentenced to 4 years in prison. However, because she had already spent time in custody while waiting for her trial and throughout the court proceedings, she only needed to serve a few more months. Angelica was released on parole in December 2017 after serving a total of less than 32 months. She spent 31 months in the Orange County Jail, followed by a month at the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility, and was released on parole. After her release, the situation remained tense. Vincent's family struggled to accept the verdict, believing that Angelica was to blame for their son's death, and they expressed their frustration with the leniency of her sentence. In contrast, Angelica insisted that only she and God knew the real truth. She continued to claim that she was not accountable for Vincent's death, describing it as a tragic accident. After her release, Angelica encountered new challenges, including the threat of deportation and difficulty finding a job. She tried to access Vincent's insurance benefits, but her guilty plea prevented her from doing so. 16 months later, she had to return to her home country, where she started to rebuild her life, leaving the traumatic events behind. She enrolled in university, secured a job, and continued to make progress, stating that she had fully recovered from the experience. There are many questions in this story that may never be answered clearly, such as who was responsible for Vincent's death, why Angelica acted as she did, and the discrepancies in witness statements. These factors create a complicated and emotionally charged situation. It's easy to be influenced by public opinion or the prosecution's version of events, but it's crucial to recognize that the truth can be elusive. Tactics used during interrogations, along with pressure and mental fatigue, can result in false confessions. Angelica was in a difficult position where the circumstances, along with her own mistakes in communication and behavior, worked against her. Was Angelica actually responsible for Vincent's death, or was it simply a tragic accident that led to a nightmare for everyone involved? On March 19, 2024, Heath Smiley returned home from work, unaware of the shocking confrontation that awaited him. As soon as he entered the house, a gunshot rang out. His wife's 15-year-old stepdaughter, Carly Gregg, had been waiting. Heath was struck in the neck by a bullet but somehow survived. In a frantic to 911 call, he exclaimed, he thinks his wife has been shot. He said that he just got home and there is blood everywhere. What could drive a teenager to commit such a terrible act? Despite what seemed like clear evidence, security footage, eyewitness testimonies, and confessions, this case revealed complexities that made it difficult to understand. The day started like any other for Carly and her mother, Ashley Smiley. Carly, 14, a gifted student who had skipped a grade, was known for her intelligence but was also facing emotional challenges. She was in therapy for anxiety and stress, largely due to her troubled relationship with her biological father, Kevin Gregg, who struggled with banned substance addiction. Meanwhile, Ashley was a devoted algebra teacher at Northwest Rankin High School and a cherished member of the community. She concentrating on her career and family. At school that day, Carly still interacted with her friends and teachers. Although she appeared normal on the outside, she was grappling with serious issues, including conflicts with her mother over banned substance use. Ashley had recently learned that Carly was using marijuana through vape pens, which created tension between them. After arriving home around 4 p.m., Ashley, having received information about Carly's supposed marijuana use, decided to confront her. As soon as they entered the house, Ashley went to Carly's bedroom to look for evidence of its use, and at this moment, they were alone in the home. Surveillance footage captured Carly approaching her mother with an object concealed behind her back. Ashley had a loaded gun in the house for protection because she was worried about Carly's biological father, Kevin. Carly found the gun under the bedside where Ashley slept. Shortly after an argument started, Carly has attacked her mother 3 times at close range. After the shooting, Carly sent a panicked text to a friend asking for help with an emergency. When her friend received the message, she hurried to Carly's house. Upon arriving at the front door, Carly asked her friend in a serious tone, "Are you squeamish around dead bodies?" She then led her friend to the bedroom where Ashley was lying on the floor. After showing her friend the scene, Carly reportedly removed an indoor camera from its mount and put it in the refrigerator, which suggested she was trying to hide evidence and indicated that her actions were planned. Before leaving the office, Heath received a text from Ashley's phone asking when he would be home from work. He replied that he would be working a bit late. Heath got home around 5:03 p.m. and didn't notice anything strange as he entered the house. However, when he opened the kitchen door, a gunshot was fired. Fortunately for Heath, Carly missed her shot. During the incident, he was grazed by a bullet in the neck and then tried to chase after Carly as she ran outside. Heath Smiley made a desperate call to 911. His tone was urgent as he shared details about the incident. He mentioned that he had been shot in the neck and that Carly, his stepdaughter, had fled the scene. He stated that Carly shot him in the head and told the dispatcher that Carly had a gun, which he believed was left on the kitchen counter. He described Carly and noted that she ran away. This information was essential for law enforcement as they prepared to respond. Deputies from the Rankin County Sheriff's Office arrived at the scene within minutes of the call. They found Heath outside the front door, visibly injured and in need of medical help. Officers assessed his condition and called for medical assistance while securing the area. As deputies entered the house, they found Ashley lying on the floor of her bedroom. The scene was chaotic, with clear signs of a violent struggle. The deputies observed multiple gunshot wounds on Ashley's body, confirming that she had been attacked at close range. The first steps taken by law enforcement involved securing the crime scene and collecting evidence. They documented the position of Ashley's body, gathered possible ballistic evidence from both the inside and outside of the home. The deputies reviewed surveillance footage from the residence to establish a timeline of events leading up to the shooting. Heath shared a detailed account of what he experienced when he returned home, which later became important testimony in court. His observations about Carly's behavior right before and after the shooting were essential for understanding her mental state. As part of their investigation, deputies began searching for Carly by using outdoor surveillance footage to trace her movements after she fled. A helicopter from the Mississippi Highway Patrol assisted in the search. Carly was captured about 30 minutes after the shooting without any further incidents. She was taken into custody and charged with several offenses. The evidence gathered at the scene, along with statements from Heath, combined with the prompt response from law enforcement and their careful evidence collection, set the stage for a complex legal case against Carly. She was detained at Rankin County Jail in Brandon, Mississippi, while awaiting trial. Carly was charged as an adult with murder, attempted murder, and tampering with evidence, with her bond set at $1 million due to the seriousness of the charges. During this time, Carly remained in custody as the legal process continued. While Carly was in custody, her legal team began preparing her defense. The prosecution relied on evidence from the scene, including eyewitness statements and forensic analysis. Carly pleaded not guilty, insisting she was innocent. As the case moved forward, she underwent multiple mental health evaluations to better understand her psychological state before the incident. Her history of anxiety and past therapy sessions became important aspects of the defense's strategy. Months after her arrest, Carly was presented with a plea deal that would result in a 40-year prison sentence, but she, through her defense team, chose to reject it and proceed to trial. This choice reflected her determination to fight the charges against her. As the trial date drew closer, Carly's lawyers concentrated on collecting evidence and witness statements. They aimed to create a thorough defense that would address both the factual aspects of the case and Carly's mental health challenges. Their preparation included reviewing surveillance videos, analyzing text messages, and consulting with mental health professionals. While Greg's defense team does not deny that she killed her mother, attorneys claim that the teenager was experiencing a mental health crisis on the day of the murder and does not remember the shooting. The situation with Carly took a significant turn on August 19 when the judge questioned the defense attorneys. Although Carly was found competent to stand trial, concerns were raised about her mental condition at the time of the alleged crime. In a courtroom that attracted national interest, Judge Dewey Arthur challenged the defense's handling of an important mental health evaluation report. He was worried about the late submission of the report, implying it might have been a tactic to gain an advantage in the trial. Defense attorneys Bridget Todd and Kevin Kemp argued that the delay was unintentional. They pointed out the challenges in obtaining the report and assured the court that they would provide it to the prosecution as soon as it was complete. Arthur then emphasized the need for transparency and fairness in the legal system. As the trial date approached, the case of Carly Gregg continued to evolve. On September 10, just 6 days before the trial, the defense filed a motion with the judge to exclude a key piece of evidence, a urine test taken when Carly was admitted to the detention center. The defense argued that the test was done without proper authorization and should be considered inadmissible. In response, prosecutors asserted that the test was necessary for safety reasons and pointed out that Carly had voluntarily admitted to using marijuana. They argued that this evidence was important for understanding her mental state at the time of the crime. Judge Dewey Arthur carefully considered the case and decided in favor of the prosecution, rejecting the defense's request to exclude the banned substance test results. The judge deemed the search reasonable given the circumstances and associated risks. Additionally, he issued a gag order preventing Carly's lawyers from discussing the case with the media, following allegations that the defense had improperly commented on case details. The first day of the Carly Gregg murder trial was marked by a somber mood in the courtroom. The prosecution introduced evidence, which included a 911 call recording and body camera footage from the day of the shooting. Carly Gregg, now 15 years old, is accused of murdering her mother, Ashley Smiley, and trying to kill her stepfather, Heath Smiley. The trial began with testimony from Rankin County dispatcher, who played the 911 call made by Heath. In the recording, Heath sounded panicked and described the shooting and the heartbreaking moment he found his wife's body. The prosecution then showed body camera footage from Rankin County Patrol deputy, who arrived at the scene. This footage captured the chaotic moment as Heath, visibly shaken, explained to the deputy what had happened and where his deceased wife was located. The jury viewed the footage, which starkly depicted the tragic aftermath inside the home where Ashley was found lifeless. In their opening statements, the prosecution described Carly's life, which involved her relationship with a boyfriend, social media activity, and instances of self-harm. They claimed that on the day of the shooting, Carly had a confrontation with a friend at school and that her mother found vape pens in her room. The prosecution contended that Carly shot her mother using a .357 Magnum gun that she was hiding behind her back. They provided evidence to support their case, including ballistic evidence and gunshot residue found on Carly's hands. The defense presented an alternate view, arguing that Carly had a loving relationship with her mother and was generally a good student. They claimed that when her stepfather came home, Carly could have been frightened and confused, which might have contributed to the tragic incident. As evidence was presented, the jury had the challenging task of deciding whether Carly Gregg was guilty or innocent. On the second day of trial, details surrounding the incident were further explored. Carly's stepfather, Heath, took the stand to share his version of events. He spoke about his positive relationship with Carly and expressed his respect for Ashley as a mother. Heath described that the morning of the shooting seemed normal and stated there were no obvious signs of distress from Carly. He recounted how he received a text from Ashley. He returned home, only to encounter chaos when he opened the door and faced a gun. He described the struggle to take the gun from Carly and the gunshots that followed. After the shooting, he observed that Carly looked scared and was in a state of hysteria. Heath testified that he searched the house for an intruder but found no one. Friends of Carly spoke about her character and the changes they noticed in her behavior. They described her as a good person with no history of violence, but they observed increasing banned substance use and worrying comments about wanting to harm her parents. One Carly's friend shared a conversation she had with Carly after the shooting. She was the friend Carly called for help after Carly attacked her mother. She told the court that Carly had allegedly confessed to shooting her mother and indicated a wish to harm her stepfather. The girl testified that she heard gunshots after she ran into the backyard. The trial also examined Carly's relationship with her biological father, Kevin. Heath said Kevin had a history of banned substance use, which raised concerns about his influence in Carly's life. Heath mentioned specific instances where Kevin's behavior negatively affected Carly, including forcing her to drink alcohol when she was young. The defense used the issue of Carly's biological father to shift attention away from the murder being a deliberate act, suggesting instead that it was a tragic accident due to Carly's unstable mental health. The defense continued to emphasize Carly's mental health issues and her love for her mother, arguing that the tragic events were the result of her mental state rather than a purposeful act of violence. On the third day of the trial, the complexities of the case were further explored. The defense provided an in-depth overview of Carly's mental health history using medical records, school documents, journal entries, and a sketchbook. Dr. Andrew Clark, a well-respected child and adolescent psychiatrist, served as an expert witness for the defense. He diagnosed Carly with bipolar II disorder, which is characterized by mood swings and periods of mania or depression. Dr. Clark presented extensive evidence from Carly's medical records, revealing her prolonged battles with depression and anxiety. He also discussed specific instances of self-harm and troubling behaviors from several years ago. The examination of Carly's journal entries and sketchbook exposed a more troubling aspect of her mental condition. Dr. Clark shared excerpts that conveyed feelings of despair, hopelessness, and aggression. These entries shed light on Carly's inner struggles and possible issues with intrusive thoughts. The defense argued that Carly's mental health problems, along with various life stressors, created a situation that led to her violent actions. They highlighted her challenging childhood, which included the death of her sister and her parents' divorce. The prosecution disputed Dr. Andrew Clark's evaluation of Carly. They raised concerns about the reliability of Carly's own account of her symptoms and contended that she was able to distinguish between right and wrong when the crimes occurred. On the third day of the trial, Carly's relationship with her biological father was once again examined. The defense presented evidence indicating that Carly's relationship with Kevin was troubled, leading to emotional distress due to his actions. This information reinforced the argument that Carly's mental health was affected by her family situation. On the fourth day of the trial, the state presented rebuttal witnesses to challenge the defense's claims about Carly's mental condition. The first witness was a psychiatric nurse practitioner who evaluated Carly in January 2024. She testified that during her evaluation and follow-up sessions, Carly clearly stated that she did not hear voices. The nurse also mentioned that she adjusted Carly's medication to help with her depression and anxiety. Carly did not report experiencing any hallucinations or delusions in later sessions. The next witness to testify before the jury was Rebecca Kirk, a licensed professional counselor. She had meetings with Carly for counseling on 9 different occasions prior to the tragic events of March 19th. During her testimony, Kirk stated that Carly did not show any self-harm or homicidal thoughts during their sessions. She highlighted that depression and anxiety are common issues among her clients, indicating that Carly's symptoms were not unusual. The last witness on the 4th day of testimony was a forensic psychiatrist tasked with evaluating Carly's mental state according to Mississippi's legal standards for insanity. He reviewed various types of evidence, including Carly's journal entries, her statements, and the context of the case. Based on his evaluation, he concluded that Carly was aware of the nature and wrongness of her actions at the time of the incident. He pointed out that while some of Carly's writings and statements were dramatic, others raised concerns. He stressed in court that the low dosage of Lexapro Carly had recently been prescribed could not explain her alleged actions. The state's expert witnesses had very different opinions compared to the defense's expert. Dr. Clark previously testified that Carly was undergoing a mental health crisis at the time of the shooting, mentioning her mood swings, eating disorders, self-harm, and hallucinations as signs of her declining mental health. The courtroom was charged with emotions when the sentence was announced. Carly began to cry. Her family also showed their feelings. Before the jury could issue their final verdict on the sentence, both the prosecution and defense delivered their closing arguments. Prosecutors stated that Carly Gregg did not show any remorse for her actions, highlighting that she was aware of the nature and consequences of her behavior. She provided evidence to support her claim that Gregg acted with planning and intent. On the morning of the 5th day of trial, a key moment arrived. The jury took 2 hours to reach a unanimous decision, was ready to announce their verdict. As the courtroom quieted, the judge solemnly declared that Carly Gregg was guilty on all 3 counts: murder, attempted murder, and tampering with evidence. After the verdict, the jury moved on to the sentencing phase to decide the punishment for Carly based on the evidence and the seriousness of her actions. Considering the gravity of the crimes, the judge sentenced Carly Gregg to life in prison without the possibility of parole for murdering her mother and attempting to murder her stepfather. Additionally, she received a 10-year sentence for tampering with evidence, but this term would run concurrently, meaning Carly would serve a total of life in prison. Carly is not finished yet. Just a few weeks after her trial concluded, she began seeking a new trial. Should she have accepted a 40-year plea deal, or was it wise to go to trial? It was a regular afternoon at Danvers's high school. Most students had already left, and the hallways were quiet. But inside a second-floor bathroom, something terrible was happening. A well-loved teacher had just finished her last class of the day. She had no idea that one of her students was watching her. Minutes later, security cameras caught something strange, him walking out with his hood up and hands covered in blood. He moved through the school as if nothing had happened, casually talking to classmates, grabbing his things, and disappearing into the night. No one knew the dark secret he had just left behind, not yet. Philip Chisholm was born on January 21, 1999, in Tennessee. From a young age, he showed a keen interest in sports, and by the time he entered high school, he had already made a name for himself as a talented soccer player. His skills on the field were undeniable. In 2012, his teammates credited him as the driving force behind their championship win in the league. To those around him, Philip seemed like a friendly yet reserved young man. No one suspected that beneath his quiet demeanor, he was battling deep personal struggles. Philip's home life was far from stable. His father, a former military officer, had succumbed to alcoholism and frequently subjected him to both physical and emotional abuse. Heated arguments with his wife, Diana Chisholm, were a regular occurrence. By the fall of 2013, the tension had reached a breaking point. They decided to separate. Philip was uprooted from the life he knew and moved with his mother to a small town in Massachusetts, while his father relocated to Florida. As part of their divorce agreement, his father was permitted only limited visitation with Philip. Practically overnight, his world had changed completely. Adjusting to a new environment proved difficult for Philip. Already introverted, he struggled to find his place at his new school. Socializing didn't come easily to him, but over time, he began to open up. He gradually integrated into school life, even trying out for the basketball team. Though he made friends, he was selective about whom he spent time with, limiting his conversations in class to only a few people he deemed trustworthy. He stayed away from alcohol and banned substance, never drawing much attention to himself. However, beneath the surface, trouble was brewing. Philip found academics particularly challenging. Rather than engaging with his lessons, he often retreated into his own world, sketching in his notebook and listening to music instead of paying attention in class. It was during this time that Colleen Ritzer, one of the most beloved teachers at the school, noticed this new student. Known for her ability to connect with students, Colleen had dreamed of becoming a teacher from a young age. Excelling in mathematics, she pursued it as her career, earning her degree in mathematics with a specialization in secondary education, and began teaching 8th grade math that same year. Her dedication to her students was unmistakable. She frequently stayed after school to offer extra help and used social media to engage with them. When Philip arrived at the school, Colleen quickly noticed his academic struggles. Understanding that he was going through a rough time, she saw potential in him and believed he just needed some guidance to get back on track. However, unlike most of his classmates, Philip showed no interest in her efforts. On the morning of October 22, 2013, Philip arrived at Danvers's high school carrying multiple bags. Inside them were gloves, a change of clothes, a mask, and a box cutter, items that had nothing to do with schoolwork. Later that day, he attended Colleen's class. When the lesson was over, she approached him, offering to stay after class to help him prepare for an upcoming test. Philip's reaction was anything but appreciative. Instead, he erupted into an angry outburst. Colleen attempted to calm him down, but he stormed off. At around 3 p.m., Colleen went to the bathroom, unaware that Philip was closely following her. By that time, most students had left the school. Philip quietly entered the bathroom wearing gloves and holding a box cutter. Suddenly, he attacked Colleen, covering her mouth with a cloth to silence her. He overpowered her and stabbed her at least 16 times. The assault was interrupted when another student entered the bathroom. She saw Philip but assumed he was just changing for soccer practice, not realizing the violence happening nearby. She left without raising an alarm, unknowingly encountering a murderer. Then, Philip left the bathroom with his hood up and one hand covered in blood. He headed toward the school parking lot with a sinister plan to find a dumpster to dispose of the body. On his way, he casually greeted several friends, who had no idea about the horrific crime he had just committed. Soon after, he changed out of his clothes, putting on a white t-shirt and a red hoodie. With a recycling bin in hand, he returned to the bathroom. This time, he came out, made his way to the elevator and hiding his teacher's lifeless body. After leaving the school, Philip took the recycling bin to a secluded wooded area. There, he disguised Colleen's body with a tree branch and covered her remains with dry leaves. He also left a vague note that said, "I hate everyone." Acting normally, he returned to the school. Although his messy appearance should have raised concern, no one noticed anything unusual, allowing him to collect his belongings from his locker and leave without any interruptions. Philip thought he had gotten away with the perfect crime, but he was very wrong. Hours later, his mother started to worry when she realized he was missing. She went to the nearest police station to file a missing person report. At the same time, his soccer teammates noticed he wasn't at practice and began to search for him, becoming increasingly anxious. The police responded quickly and asked Philip's phone provider to track his last known location. The signal was traced to the area near Hollywood Hits Theater. Investigators went there and found that he had bought a movie ticket before disappearing. Shortly after that, his phone went offline at 9 p.m. The principal of Danvers High School emailed staff about Philip's disappearance. Shortly after, a math teacher called her with worrying news. Colleen Ritzer's parents also reported that she did not return home. This was particularly concerning because Philip had been in Colleen's last class that day, raising fears that they may have been together before they both disappeared. Colleen's parents were desperately trying to contact her, but their calls went unanswered. By around 11 p.m., they formally reported her missing. Police tracked Colleen's phone to the school area, noting the coincidence of two missing persons from the same school. This led them to investigate further. Their investigation took a troubling turn when they found Colleen's car still parked at the school, indicating something was wrong. While searching the building, they examined the second-floor bathroom and encountered a horrifying scene. Bloodstains covered the area, and Colleen's purse was left behind. A blood-spattered recycling bin was also found in the corner. Following this grim evidence, officers searched the woods behind the school and discovered blood-soaked clothing that belonged to Colleen. This evidence confirmed that a serious crime had occurred. Authorities quickly began questioning students and staff in hopes of finding witnesses. A student came forward to share an unsettling incident he had overheard between Philip and Colleen while he was organizing his locker. He noticed Philip was raising his voice at Colleen, who was trying to calm him down. The student thought Philip's anger might have been triggered by Colleen's question about his family, which unintentionally reminded him of his parents' divorce. Even though Colleen quickly moved on to a different topic, Philip continued to seem upset and began muttering to himself. The student felt that something was wrong but never thought Philip could become violent. A female student came forward with important information. She told investigators she saw the back of a person who appeared to be changing clothes. The person's rear end was exposed, with clothes piled on the floor in the bathroom that afternoon. Additionally, a mother who was picking up her child around 3:30 p.m. reported seeing Philip quickly leaving the school. This evidence suggested that something had occurred between Philip and Colleen. Detectives then reviewed the school's surveillance footage to understand the timeline of events leading up to their disappearances. The footage revealed alarming details. At 7:45 a.m., Philip arrived at school carrying several bags, which he stored in his locker. Then, at 2:54 p.m., Colleen was seen leaving a classroom and heading towards the second-floor bathroom. Just a minute later, Philip appeared in the hallway, watching her closely before briefly returning to the classroom. Moments after that, he came back into view with his hood up and followed her into the bathroom while putting on gloves. At 3:06 p.m., a female student was seen entering the bathroom and quickly exiting moments later. At 3:07 p.m., Philip left the bathroom with his hood up and walked to the parking lot. He returned 2 minutes later, now wearing a white t-shirt. After a few minutes, he was spotted again, this time in a red hoodie. At 3:16 p.m., he went back into the bathroom with a recycling bin. By 3:22 p.m., security footage showed him wearing a ski mask as he pushed the bin into the elevator. Shortly after, he was seen dragging it outside toward the student parking lot. Later that evening, Philip returned to the school, entered the bathroom again, and changed clothes. This time, he was barefoot, wearing a black hoodie. When investigators finished reviewing the footage, they were certain of one thing: Colleen had entered the bathroom but did not come out. In contrast, Philip had repeatedly entered and exited, changing his clothes each time and pushing a large bin on one occasion. Coupled with the blood evidence found in the bathroom, the conclusion was clear: Colleen had been murdered, and Philip was their main suspect. Law enforcement quickly began searching for Philip, who was still missing. They checked security footage from the school and nearby streets to see if they could find any signs of his movements. Simultaneously, they monitored Colleen Ritzer's bank account since Philip had stolen her wallet along with her credit cards, indicating he might have already used them. Their suspicions were confirmed when they found that Colleen's card had been used to buy a burger, fries, and a drink. A movie ticket was also purchased, and location data from Philip's phone showed he was at the theater shortly after the crime occurred. While police worked to find him, an unexpected turn of events happened. Around 2:30 a.m. on October 23rd, an officer in a nearby town saw a young man walking along the highway at the intersection of Route 1, North and Salem Road. It was Philip, aimlessly wandering without a clear direction. The officer recognized him from the missing person alert and stopped to ask questions. During a search, the officer found Colleen Ritzer's credit card and driver's license in Philip's possession. Additionally, his pants still had blood stains on them. He was promptly taken into custody and brought to the local police station. When officers searched Philip's backpack, they discovered Colleen's purse, her underwear, and a box cutter with dried blood on it. Alarmingly, there were also traces of semen and blood on Philip's own underwear. When interrogated about the blood, Philip coldly remarked, "It's from the girl," referring to Colleen, his teacher. He showed no remorse and proceeded to inform the police that her body was buried in the woods. At 3 a.m., a team of officers went to the wooded area behind Danvers High School. After searching for some time, they noticed a pile of leaves and debris. One officer spotted a thumb with pink nail polish sticking out from the leaves. When they removed the foliage, they were met with a horrifying scene. Colleen's lifeless body was lying on her back, her throat cut, and a tree branch had violated her remains. Her face and body showed signs of severe trauma. Nearby, officers found a pair of blood-soaked white gloves and a handwritten note that stated, "I hate everyone." Colleen's remains were quickly taken for forensic examination. The autopsy revealed she had suffered 16 stab wounds and had been abuse-assaulted twice. Philip was immediately charged with aggravated assault, armed robbery, and first-degree murder. He was held without bail. That morning, on October 23rd, police visited Philip's mother at her new apartment, which she had moved into after leaving Tennessee due to her divorce. She appeared very upset and acknowledged that the separation had been hard for both her and Philip. Later, through his attorney, she released a statement offering her condolences to Colleen's family. In contrast, Philip's uncle took a different view. He suggested that something must have triggered his nephew's actions, arguing that teenagers can be quick to anger, and noted that Philip was only 14 years old. He characterized Philip as a well-behaved child from a good family, seemingly minimizing the seriousness of the situation. Philip's former soccer coach shared similar feelings, saying he wanted to learn the full story before judging the teenager. Meanwhile, a student, Rania Ridui, found it hard to comprehend the tragedy. She couldn't understand why anyone would hurt Colleen, who she described as kind and caring. Colleen's family was heartbroken and in deep mourning. On October 28, 2013, the community came together to pay their respects at her funeral at St. Augustine Church. The service was very emotional and attended by nearly 1,000 people, including 400 of Colleen's students from Danvers High School, many of whom wore pink, her favorite color. The entrance to the church was decorated with pink flowers, symbolizing the love and admiration she inspired in those who knew her. Colleen's cousin spoke passionately about the large turnout at Colleen's funeral, which highlighted the significant impact she had on her community. She noted that even though Colleen had a brief life, she made a lasting impression on education, inspiring many students with her dedication and love for teaching. She also emphasized Colleen's strong bond with her siblings, her commitment to being a supportive friend and mentor. With deep sorrow and respect, Colleen's cousin described Colleen as the ideal person any parent would wish for their child to become. The Reverend provided words of comfort, encouraging attendees to focus on the meaningful life Colleen led rather than the tragic way it ended. His message resonated with those grieving, reminding them to celebrate the positivity Colleen brought to the world. Months later, at a juvenile detention center in Boston, Philip committed another crime. On June 2, 2014, he entered a staff locker room bathroom and tried to strangle a 29-year-old medical staff member and attack her with a pencil. It took several employees to restrain him while he screamed threats, including, "I'm going to kill all of you." Although he didn't succeed in killing her, she was left seriously injured. A new case was opened against him, but he was still facing charges for the murder of Colleen Ritzer before going to trial for this attack. Philip's defense attorney admitted that he had killed the teacher but argued that he should not be held criminally responsible. She claimed he was experiencing a psychotic episode and suffering from severe mental illness at the time of the murder, even stating that he had heard voices beforehand. The prosecutor strongly disagreed, asserting that Philip did not have any mental illness and presented surveillance footage as evidence. The videos showed him carefully following Colleen into the bathroom, attacking her, and then coldly placing her body into a recycling bin before wheeling it outside. The prosecutor also highlighted that after the murder, Philip casually greeted friends, ate a meal, and watched a movie while carrying evidence of his crime in his backpack. After considering the prosecution's argument, the court rejected the defense's claim of criminal insanity, ruling that Philip was mentally competent to stand trial. Since the minimum age for criminal prosecution in the United States is 14, he could be tried as an adult. On December 15, 2015, a jury found Philip guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated assault, and armed robbery. As the judge read the verdict, Philip stood silently, his hands cuffed and his expression blank. Colleen's mother, heartbroken by his lack of remorse, declared that Philip was truly evil and beyond rehabilitation. Their family will never get a second chance with Colleen, and he shouldn't get one either, she said. Despite these emotional statements, Philip showed no reaction. He did not flinch or show any empathy or regret for the life he had taken or the family he had devastated. On February 26, 2016, despite the defense team arguing that Philip was mentally ill, he was convicted of killing Colleen Ritzer and sentenced to 40 to 60 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 40 years, a sentence that Colleen's family felt was not harsh enough. However, this was not his last sentencing. On April 26, 2024, a decade later, he faced trial again for attempting to murder a medical worker at the Boston Juvenile Facility. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense as his attorney declared that Philip wanted to take full responsibility and resolve the case quickly. Despite this, it was evident to everyone that he lacked genuine remorse. The medical worker he attacked described him as a monster and a remorseless killer. She recounted the terrifying incident, stating that he intended to kill her. During her testimony, she revealed that his face still haunted her as a constant reminder of the trauma he caused. She pleaded with the court to keep Philip in prison for life, so no one else would suffer at his hands. Ultimately, the judge sentenced Philip to an additional 17 to 20 years for the attack, to be served concurrently with his original sentence for Colleen's murder. To this day, Philip remains in prison, serving time for the crimes he committed against two women who only tried to help him, but were met with unimaginable violence instead. Colleen's family chose to celebrate her memory instead of focusing on their sorrow after her tragic death. 1 year following her murder, they created a scholarship in her honor. In a public statement, they remembered Colleen as a kind and caring young woman whose love for teaching defined her life. They take comfort in knowing that her legacy lives on. Many students who have received the scholarship are pursuing teaching careers, inspired by Colleen's dedication and passion for education. Although she is no longer, her influence remains strong in the classrooms and hearts of those who knew her. In October 2024, Chisholm's attorneys appealed to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, arguing that brain scan evidence of mental illness had been wrongly excluded. On February 25, 2025, the SJC denied a new trial, upholding Chisholm's conviction and 40-year parole. Ritzer's family expressed relief, stating the ruling allowed them to grieve without appeal uncertainties. The brutal murder of Colleen Ritzer at Danvers High School left an indelible scar on her family, students, and community, shattering the illusion of safety in a place meant for learning. Yet, from this tragedy, Colleen's radiant legacy endures through the scholarship bearing her name, inspiring future educators to carry forward her passion and kindness. Philip Chisholm, whose cold indifference and violent acts stole a beloved teacher's life, remains behind bars, his 2025 appeal denial ensuring accountability for his crimes. As Danvers continues to heal, the memory of Colleen, her infectious smile, unwavering dedication, and boundless compassion, lives on, a beacon of light that no darkness can extinguish. Many people do not recognize that the person in front of them is actually dangerous rather than loving. Unfortunately, not everyone has the opportunity to correct their mistakes. History tends to repeat itself, including its darkest moments. In today's story, we will discuss a significant betrayal that led to one of the most brutal and senseless crimes in Alaska's history, driven by greed and foolishness. This tragic event took place in Anchorage, Alaska. Interestingly, although the overall crime rate in the U.S. has been declining, Anchorage is an exception, with violent crime rates being 60% higher than the national average. Statistics show that even women in this area commit violent crimes more frequently, usually targeting their loved ones. Cynthia Hoffman spent her entire life in Anchorage. Family and friends described her as a bright and kind girl working hard to achieve her American dream. She faced challenges due to a developmental delay, which made her school experience difficult. Nevertheless, Cynthia never gave up, consistently aimed for greater achievements. She graduated from high school, completed driving school, and secured a job at a diner. She cherished her friendships, particularly with her best friend Denali Bremer. The two had been friends since elementary school and had plans to go to college together. Although she aspired to attend college, those dreams were ultimately unfulfilled. Cynthia's parents were divorced, but she had good relationships with both her father, Timothy Hoffman, and her mother, who both supported her endeavors. On June 2, 2019, 19-year-old Cynthia missed a scheduled meeting with her father. Timothy, a construction worker, often brought Cynthia along on part-time jobs where she helped him with minor tasks. In return, he paid her, teaching her the importance of hard work and saving money from a young age. Cynthia had assisted her father frequently for over a year, and they saw each other daily. On that particular day, she was expected to meet him after school. Her father had promised to pay her for past work when he was short on cash, so she was excited to go because it meant she would get paid double. She also mentioned that she needed money for a party that weekend. Cynthia texted her father to let him know she was at the park for a meeting and promised to return in about an hour. Timothy waited for her, but she never came back. He tried calling her phone and sending her messages, but she didn't respond. He thought it was possible she was just out with friends and lost track of time, so he hesitated to call the police. However, none of his messages were read, and his calls went unanswered throughout the day. Concerned about his daughter and her unexplained absence, he decided to contact the authorities. When Timothy arrived at the police station, he reported Cynthia as missing. The police took the case seriously and quickly began their investigation. They organized search teams, brought in volunteers. Timothy joined the search right away, driving around the city and asking people if they had seen his daughter. He showed them her photo, but despite his efforts all day, he couldn't find any useful information. From the beginning, he had a nagging feeling that something was wrong. Cynthia's behavior was unusual. She had never been gone for this long before, and she didn't have any mental health issues or a tendency to run away. She was naive, needed guidance. There had been no family conflicts or signs that she wanted to leave. In the days that followed, Timothy began to lose hope for a positive outcome. He started to fear that someone had lured his daughter to the park with harmful intentions, despite the ongoing search. The police initially thought Timothy might have more information, but he had a verified alibi during this time. Timothy stayed in touch with Cynthia's friends, particularly her best friend Denali, who had been in regular contact with Cynthia and was one of the last to see her. Denali expressed that she had no knowledge of Cynthia's whereabouts and hoped for her safe return. She requested updates if Timothy discovered any new information. Meanwhile, some school friends reported that they last saw Cynthia and Denali leaving together in a car, heading off in an unknown direction. This raised suspicions, as lying seemed unnecessary unless someone had something to conceal. When investigators looked into Cynthia's social media, they found that a person named Tyler had invited her for a ride, which she had accepted. This invitation coincided with the timing of her disappearance. With no new leads, detectives began tracking Cynthia's contacts leading up to her missing status. Who is Tyler? What was Cynthia doing, and where was she headed? Her classmates confirmed that she had planned to meet her father to help him with work and collect her payment. After the police spoke with Denali, she changed her story about Timothy. She admitted that after classes, she and Cynthia were walking to their cars when she dropped Cynthia off at the nearest city park. Following that, Cynthia sent her father a message updating him on her whereabouts and promised to see him later. However, after those messages, Cynthia's phone went silent. The search efforts then shifted from the city streets to the dense underbrush of the park. On June 4, 2019, just 2 days after her missing, Cynthia Hoffman was discovered dead. The 19-year-old's body was found on the banks of the Ekludna River, a popular tourist spot. Her hands were tied behind her back, and her mouth was taped shut. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head, inflicted from behind. Sadly, the concerns of her loving father were realized. Around the same time, Denali's mother went to the police station to report that Denali and her friend might know where Cynthia had gone and could be connected to the case. According to Denali's mother, both Denali and her 16-year-old friend, Caden McIntosh, claimed to know what happened to Cynthia. They were both interrogated, with the police particularly focused on why Denali was using a different name. When they met Caden, he caught the officer's attention. The boy was visibly shaking and gave confused, evasive answers, leading them to believe he should be questioned first. Caden was extremely nervous and soon admitted to murdering Cynthia Hoffman. He claimed that his 18-year-old girlfriend, Denali, had planned the murder but could not explain why. Denali was uncooperative from the start, avoiding communication with investigators, refuting Caden's account, and presenting an alternate narrative. She stated that she, Caden, and Cynthia went to Thunderbird Falls after school for a photo shoot. They intended to create a unique scene that involved using tape and ropes to stage a kidnapping, with Cynthia's mouth taped and her hands bound. Denali admitted that she carried a gun for self-defense, and all participants in the plan were aware of this. She recounted that at one point, Caden took the gun, aimed it at Cynthia, and attacked her in the back of the head without any clear reason. Denali said she was shocked and confused afterward, unsure of how to respond. The group simply disposed of the body in the water and left, as Caden commanded her to do so in a threatening manner, which intimidated her into compliance. She felt it wasn't worth informing the police to avoid causing a panic, worried that she might become another victim. Additionally, she couldn't provide any information about a motive for the murder. There were no known conflicts among them, and no one had witnessed such cruelty before. As a result of the statements, Caden McIntosh was charged with murdering Cynthia Hoffman. Criminologists examined the crime scene, and forensic experts conducted an autopsy. This led to the collection of enough evidence to reconstruct the events of June 2nd. However, the stories told by the young people at the police station contained many inconsistencies, particularly regarding the motive, which remained unclear. The mystery was clarified when law enforcement accessed Denali's mobile phone. They discovered that she was not just a witness to the murder, but also involved in it. The situation became clearer after examining her messages. After Cynthia's death, Denali posted on social media, "Oh, look what we just did," directed at someone named Tyler. This message was shockingly cynical and cruel, revealing not a grieving best friend but rather a brutal killer who took pride in her actions. The police obtained a Snapchat video that served as crucial evidence of Denali's guilt. This prompted them to question her again, as there was enough evidence to charge both Caden and Denali in connection with the murder. Caden claimed he had been manipulated and that Denali had suggested the attack. She continued to deny any wrongdoing until she was asked about Tyler, who was saved in her phone as a babe. The police found that shortly before the tragedy, Denali met a man from Kansas on an app where he claimed to be a millionaire. They started off communicating and flirting, but eventually, he sent her a disturbing message. Tyler gradually got Denali to open up about her preferences, including her intimate desires. He revealed that he was willing to pay $9 million for photos and videos depicting abuse violence. Denali became intrigued, and over time, her friend on social media convinced her to kill. Cynthia was an easy target because she was Denali's best friend, very naive, and completely trusted her. This made it easy for Denali to lure her into a trap. Investigators identified the car used by the young killers during the murder. It belonged to a relative of Denali. They interviewed Denali's 19-year cousin, Caleb Leland, who was aware of the $9 million offer and supported Denali, thinking the money would solve their financial issues. Denali had asked to borrow his car to take the victim and her accomplice to the murder scene. In return, she promised him $500,000. After agreeing to help facilitate the murder of an innocent person, Caleb was fully aware of her intentions. He confirmed that Cynthia's murder was not a result of a desire for a photo shoot or an accident. It was a planned act of revenge for money. Denali had discussed her plans with her brothers, detailing where she intended to take her best friend and outlining the murder plan in great detail. Although Caleb didn't fully believe Denali was serious at first, He grasped the seriousness of the situation only after hearing about Cynthia's death. However, his disbelief was just a cover. He was trying to downplay his role in the tragedy to lessen his potential punishment. Between May and June 2019, police focused their investigation on 3 suspects: Denali Bremer, Caden McIntosh, and Caleb Leland. They were believed to have plotted a murder together. As detectives gathered more evidence, it became increasingly clear that these teenagers were guilty. Notably, all 3 were friends of the victim, yet they betrayed her without remorse. Tragically, they valued $9 million more than the life of their friend. Investigators also found that 2 other teenagers were aware of the crime. However, they were minors at the time of the attack and were not considered accomplices. They had simply overheard Denali confessing to the crime. Their failure to report this information was disappointing, as they could have helped prevent the tragedy by alerting the police. To protect the minors and their families, their names were kept confidential and did not come up in court. The planning for the massacre began 4 months before the murder. On June 2, 2019, the juvenile offenders launched their attack. Denali invited Cynthia to join her and Caden on a hike to a remote area near Thunderbird Falls deep in the park. The accomplices had meticulously prepared their plan, even practicing with an unloaded gun. Denali pretended to be a future victim and used her brother's car, which he had lent her for $500,000. Once they reached the riverbank, Caden and Cynthia temporarily left Denali behind and advanced ahead. Suddenly, Caden drew a gun and pointed it at Cynthia's head. Denali caught up, restrained Cynthia by tying her hands and taping her mouth shut. Cynthia quickly realized this was not a prank, but it was too late for her to escape or shout for help. Terrified, she was forced to kneel. Denali's brother filmed the entire incident. Caden then shot Cynthia in the back of the head with a 9mm pistol, killing her instantly. Denali and Caden disposed of her body in the river and tried to erase any evidence linking them to the crime. They burned some of Cynthia's belongings, including her purse and mobile phone. Afterward, Denali sent a message to Cynthia's father, Timothy, from Cynthia's phone, fabricating a story about a scheduled meeting with a new boyfriend. Detectives later found evidence that Denali attempted to delete data from her mobile phone. However, despite her efforts, many conversations with Tyler remained, in which she detailed the murder plan and shared photos and videos related to the crime. Even after the murder was committed, she unsuccessfully tried to erase the incriminating evidence. In reality, she stayed in contact with Tyler throughout the murder, providing him with detailed updates. Although Tyler lived hundreds of kilometers away, he was just as responsible for the crime as the individuals who carried it out. Law enforcement focused on identifying him to ensure he faced justice. It is important to note that Tyler sought not only murder but also abuse violence. However, forensic experts found no evidence of such acts on the victim's body. This raised alarming implications, suggesting that if incentives had been provided, Denali and her accomplices might have continued to commit similar crimes. Fortunately, they were identified and arrested immediately after the first murder, and they did not receive any compensation from Tyler. Specialists were called in to investigate and traced the phone number of the perpetrator. It was revealed that Tyler was not in Kansas, but in Indiana. The actual mastermind behind the brutal crime was Darren Schillmiller, who grew up in New Salisbury. He had been exchanging photos with Denali for a while, but he had not sent her any pictures of himself. At first, Tyler had pretended to be a wealthy millionaire who won the lottery, but in reality, the instigator of the crime was a 21-year-old who was far from being a millionaire. Friends and family described him as a reclusive and strange person who had faced bullying during school. Darren had endured a difficult upbringing with an alcoholic father and had minimal social interaction in school. His unusual clothing style often led to conflicts, and after graduation, he was frequently seen engaging in suspicious activities, like chasing cats that later vanished without a trace. However, there had been no previous reports of cruelty from him. After completing his studies, he found it difficult to determine his path in life and was unable to secure a full-time job. This situation took Denali by surprise, as she genuinely thought she would receive $9 million for her crime. Once Denali discovered Tyler's real identity, she chose to cooperate with the prosecution. She revealed that she had been in an online relationship with Tyler for several months, during which he used pictures of an unrelated person from the internet to deceive her. This manipulation led her to be misled by the future killer. Denali expressed her desire to resolve her problems, and those of her family, through money, having dealt with her friend. However, this was not the only troubling request from the millionaire's friend. According to her, he urged her to commit abuse violence against 2 children, intending to use a 14-year-old and an 8-year-old boy for this purpose. They were meant to suffer and die in pain, enduring torture, abuse. Fortunately, this horrific plan never came to fruition. When the police arrived at Darren's door, he was taken aback and promptly confessed to everything. He admitted to having been in contact with Denali for several months, realized that she was easily influenced and manipulated. Consequently, this quiet, deceitful man convinced himself that he could take someone's life through another person. Denali acknowledged that she remained influenced by Tyler, even after he refused to finance the initial massacre. They continued to have faith in him, waited for payment, and naively hoped for a better life ahead. Meanwhile, Tyler manipulated them, holding on to their trust while blackmailing them with incriminating evidence of the murder. He then demanded more killings and continued his threats. Fortunately, law enforcement apprehended the entire gang before further harm could be done. The prosecutor's office charged all those involved in the massacre with conspiracy and premeditated murder. The 2 youngest participants, whose identities were never revealed, were also accused of being complicit because they hid the murderers' identities. They never even informed her parents, despite having the chance to potentially save her. The crime that occurred in Alaska gained significant media attention, sparking public outrage. Journalists were eager for a sensational story, which created challenges for the victim's family. The relatives of the young offenders also faced severe repercussions, including numerous threats and genuine fears for their safety. Cynthia's family mourned her loss, lamenting that her trusting nature and vulnerability, stemming from her developmental delays, ultimately led to her suffering. With the same level of intelligence as a 12-year-old, she believes she is surrounded by trustworthy individuals. Many people who knew Darren spoke to the media and the police about him. Several of his classmates described him as a strange teenager who was withdrawn and struggled to fit in. It was not surprising that he grew into a cruel internet troll with violent intentions. Detectives discovered a significant amount of incriminating material on his computer, including numerous files of child abuse, which led to additional charges against him. He also showed a disturbing desire for cruelty and torture. Evidence revealed that Denali was not the first victim of this liar. He used various social networks and messaging apps to create fake accounts, deceiving teenagers and even children. Initially, his actions were limited to obtaining obscene images, but feeling untouchable, he escalated his behavior. Over several years, he lured dozens of girls and women into his traps. Some of the victims, from whom he extorted obscene photos, testified in court. Once he received the first image, he began to blackmail them for more. Fortunately, many prior victims managed to escape Darren's grasp, partly due to police threats. Unfortunately, this was not the case for Denali, whom Darren acknowledged was the most naive of his victims. Denali and his accomplices were involved in one of the most serious crimes in Alaskan history, the brutal murder of Cynthia Hoffman. This tragic event highlighted themes of betrayal, greed, and folly. Cynthia fell victim to an online manipulator, failing to verify his identity, and ultimately led 4 others into the murder. The case remained confidential, but the lives of everyone involved were forever altered. In February 2023, Denali Bremer, 23, pleaded guilty to first-degree murder after charges of conspiracy to commit murder, solicitation to commit murder, tampering with evidence, and second-degree murder were dismissed. Nearly a year later, her sentencing will take place over 3 days in January and February 2024. The 99-year sentence is the maximum the court is allowed to impose, according to a press release from the Alaska Department of Justice. Caleb Leland, who provided the car for the crime, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in November 2023 and was sentenced to 30 years in prison in August 2024. On May 17, 2024, Caden McIntosh, 21, pleaded guilty to the murder of Cynthia. Anchorage Superior Court Judge Andrew Peterson accepted Caden's guilty plea to one count of second-degree murder. All other counts were dismissed as part of the agreement. The court will decide Caden's sentence at a sentencing hearing. The agreement between the parties allows the court to sentence Caden to a prison term of 30 to 85 years. Sentencing is scheduled to begin on November 14, 2024, before Judge Peterson, and is expected to last 2 days. Caden is currently in the custody of the Alaska Department of Corrections and is no longer eligible for release under the terms of his release. Darren Showmiller, who solicited the murder, was 25 when his trial began. He chose not to defend himself, allowing his lawyer to read a statement to the jury. Darren admitted to making a grave mistake that led to the death of an innocent girl, expressing remorse and asking for forgiveness from her family. However, these words did not sway the jury, and he was sentenced to 99 years in prison for his actions that destroyed multiple lives. Every year on the anniversary of Cynthia's death, her father organizes a motorcycle ride to celebrate. Timothy Hoffman, 58, was among those attending the event on June 2, 2024, when friends and family gathered to remember Cynthia. However, he lost control of his motorcycle and died in the accident. A 911 call reported a woman lying at the bottom of a staircase outside an apartment complex. Initially, it appeared to be a terrible accident. Perhaps she had tripped and fallen. Her keys and wallet were around her. Nothing seemed to be stolen, including her money. However, something felt off about the situation. When first responders arrived, they quickly determined that this was more than a simple fall. As detectives investigated further, they discovered evidence that transformed this case from an accident into a murder investigation. What truly happened to Danita Smith, and who wanted her dead? Danita Smith was born on November 20, 1981, in New Bern, North Carolina. She was cherished by her parents, Calvin Lee Smith and Sharon Elaine Cook, along with her 3 siblings. Danita was naturally vibrant and full of life, making her presence impossible to overlook. Friends and family often remarked that she had the unique ability to brighten any room, thanks to her warmth, kindness, and infectious smile. Her happiness shone through in every photo, reflecting her joyful spirit. In school, Danita was a dedicated and hardworking student, earning the praise of her teachers. Her commitment led her to graduate high school with honors. She then attended North Carolina Central University, starting her studies in English. During her college years, Danita discovered a passion for photojournalism. She became captivated by the power of visual storytelling and how a single photograph could evoke strong emotions. With her usual determination, she pursued this new interest and quickly gained a reputation for her outstanding photography skills. In her personal life, Danita was happy with her fiancé, Jameer Stroud, a young police officer from Greensboro, North Carolina. They met in college and had a strong relationship for 6 years before getting engaged. For Danita, their engagement signified an exciting new chapter filled with hopes for marriage, career achievements, and building a future together. However, they faced a challenge: distance. After graduating in 2004, Jameer moved to Greensboro for his job, while Danita stayed in Durham. Although they were only about an hour apart, this physical separation limited their ability to see each other every day, making their relationship depend largely on weekend visits. Unfortunately, the distance may have also created an emotional gap. Unbeknownst to Danita, Jameer had started an affair with a colleague, Shannon Crawley, a 911 dispatcher and single mother of 2. On the morning of January 4, 2007, just after 10 a.m., a distressed call came in to 911 from a man in Durham, North Carolina. He reported a shocking scene outside an apartment complex, a woman lying motionless at the bottom of the stairs, surrounded by blood. When first responders arrived, it was already too late. The woman was unresponsive. Moments later, authorities confirmed that the victim was Danita Smith. Detective Sean Pate from the Durham Police Department led the investigation and arrived at the scene to evaluate the situation. Initially, it looked like Danita had suffered a tragic fall. Her personal items, keys, wallet, were scattered around her, suggesting she might have lost her balance. There were no surveillance cameras to provide clarity, but as authorities examined Danita's body more closely, it became evident that she hadn't simply fallen, she had been murdered. A gunshot wound to the head was discovered, and her body's position had initially hidden the wound, leading others to mistakenly believe she had just fallen down the stairs. As officers reviewed her belongings, they found something odd. Her wallet still had a large amount of cash in it. If a robbery had occurred, it was unlikely the thief would have left the money behind. So what was the motive for the murder? After this shocking revelation, law enforcement quickly began searching the area for witnesses. The apartment complex, which mainly housed students, was usually busy, but fewer residents were there due to the holiday season. Nevertheless, officers found a few people who had noticed something unusual. The most significant statement came from the maintenance director of the complex. He reported seeing a woman leave the scene around the time of the incident. She was described as a tall black woman, driving a burgundy Ford Explorer. This important detail raised immediate concerns. Could this woman be linked to Danita's murder? The maintenance director had not only seen the woman but had also spoken to her. After hearing a gunshot, he noticed that she looked visibly shaken. When he asked if she had heard the shot, she confirmed that she had and appeared very upset. He proposed that they meet at another location to report the incident to the police together, but instead, she left the scene. As news of Danita's death spread, her loved ones hurried to the scene, including her fiancé, Jameer. Upon arrival, he sought out Detective Sean Pate, eager to speak with him. As is common in homicide investigations, authorities carefully examined the victim's significant other. When asked about his whereabouts that morning, Jameer said he had been home sleeping after working late the previous night, but he could not provide anyone to confirm his alibi. Although his defense wasn't very strong, the police were still gathering information, so they took note of his statement and allowed him to leave. After spending some time with Danita's family, Jameer returned home. The following day, investigators contacted him again with more questions. One important question was whether Jameer knew anyone who drove a burgundy Ford Explorer. His answer altered the course of the investigation. Without any hesitation, he named Shannon Crawley. This new information shifted the focus away from Jameer himself, who had initially been a suspect. When asked further, Jameer revealed that he had an affair with Shannon, which he described as a mistake. He mentioned that their romantic relationship ended nearly a year prior, largely because Shannon became pregnant in 2005. They decided to have an abortion, which marked the end of their romance. Although he claimed their relationship was over, Shannon continued to be a part of his life. Although they were no longer lovers, they still communicated regularly. Jameer described their connection as a strong friendship, but nothing beyond that. It became clear that Shannon might not have viewed their breakup in the same way. Even after they ended their relationship, Shannon remained involved in Jameer's life. She began attending his church, which he initially thought was just a coincidence. Then she bought a home nearby, which he also dismissed, thinking she simply liked the area. However, as investigators examined the timeline, it became evident that Shannon's feelings for Jameer had not diminished. Jameer stated that Danita and Shannon had never met, but during his conversations with investigators, he revealed an unsettling thought. He now believed Shannon had been stalking him for a while, although he hadn't recognized it before. Specific events started to make sense. He reiterated that he was the one who ended their relationship. Additionally, he remembered the last time he saw Shannon was on Christmas Eve of 2006, just weeks before Danita's murder. That night, he proudly entered the church with his fiancée Danita. Shannon was there and reacted with shock. She had no idea Jameer was engaged, or even that he was in a relationship. Until that moment, she might have thought they were about to reconnect, but she was confronted with the reality that Jameer was soon to marry someone else. Investigators had sufficient reasons to question Shannon directly. They went to her workplace to inquire about her activities on the morning of the murder. Shannon said she had been at home taking care of her sick child. She openly acknowledged her past relationship with Jameer and did not try to hide it. However, her account differed significantly from Jameer's statements to the police. Shannon claimed their relationship ended because she did not want children, while Jay said it ended after she became pregnant and had an abortion. When asked if she knew Danita, Shannon said she had never met her, believing Danita was Jameer's ex-girlfriend. This answer raised suspicions, suggesting that Jameer had kept his two relationships completely separate, making Shannon believe she was the only woman in his life. A key question arose: did Shannon own a firearm? She replied no, but investigators soon found out she was not telling the truth. A coworker of hers, Ronald Simpson, came forward with information that Shannon had bought a revolver from him in October 2006. This was significant because the gun matched the caliber used in Danita's murder. Not only did Shannon lie about owning a firearm, but she had also purchased it just months before Danita was killed. Detectives reviewed the phone records of both Shannon and Jameer. Jameer's records showed that his phone was at home during the time of the murder, supporting his alibi. While this did not completely exonerate him, since someone else could have used his phone, it was a positive indication for him. In contrast, Shannon's phone records revealed a different situation. Even though she claimed to have been at home all morning, cell tower data placed her in Durham, about 60 miles from her stated location, around the time of the murder, which brought her closer to the crime scene. When confronted about this evidence, Shannon maintained that she hadn't been in Durham that day, but the facts were not in her favor. The police then seized Shannon's burgundy Ford Explorer for forensic testing, specifically looking for gunshot residue. The analysis showed clear evidence of gunshot residue on the steering wheel, indicating that Shannon likely fired a weapon before or after driving the vehicle. This strongly suggested her involvement in the shooting incident. One last crucial detail was the testimony of the maintenance worker who talked to the woman running away from the scene. While there was no official record of a police lineup, the worker consistently described the suspect as a tall black woman, driving a burgundy Ford Explorer. This description matched Shannon Crawley perfectly. On January 9, 2007, Shannon was arrested and charged with the murder of Danita Smith. Despite the serious charges, she was released soon after on a $100,000 bond, likely because she had no prior criminal record. Additionally, her role as a 911 dispatcher and the sole caretaker of her two young children likely influenced the court's decision to grant her bail. However, instead of waiting for her trial, Shannon and her attorney took an unexpected step in May 2007. They voluntarily went to the Durham Police Department to offer a new account of events, significantly changing the story. Shannon claimed that her ex-boyfriend, Jameer, had been stalking her after their breakup. She stated that he frequently called her, showed up at her workplace without warning, made her feel unsafe. According to Shannon, a worried coworker even offered her a gun for protection, knowing that Jameer, being a police officer, owned a firearm. She acknowledged that she took the gun but later regretted it and disposed of it shortly after. Shannon made a shocking revelation to the police. She stated that on the morning Danita was murdered, Jameer forced her at gunpoint into her own car. She alleged that he made her drive to an unfamiliar apartment complex, which was Danita's home. After taking her phone and keys, he exited the vehicle. She described sitting in the car for a long time, confused about what was happening, until she suddenly heard shouting. Although she couldn't understand the words, she recognized Jameer's voice arguing with a woman. Then, she heard a gunshot. According to Shannon, Jameer ran back to the car in a panic and demanded that she drive away. He got into the back seat, crouching on the floor and urging her to leave quickly. At that moment, she claimed to have seen a maintenance worker. She briefly stopped, hoping he would see that she was in trouble, but ultimately drove off because Jameer was pressing his gun against her back. However, there were immediate issues with her account. She needed to explain the gunshot residue found on the steering wheel of her car. She told the police that during their escape, Jameer had grabbed the wheel while moving from the front seat to the back, leaving the residue behind. Shannon was out on bond for nearly 2 years before her trial finally started on February 8, 2010. During the trial, the prosecution argued that Shannon had developed an obsession with Jameer and saw Danita as an obstacle to her future with him. They claimed that jealousy and a desperate need to eliminate the competition motivated her actions. In contrast, the defense argued that Shannon was being framed and that Jameer was the real culprit. However, Shannon did not provide any specific reasons for believing that Jameer would have committed the crime. Instead, she described him as violent and controlling, presenting him as a dangerous, unpredictable man. Despite the defense's efforts, the jury would hear about Shannon's past false allegations against Jameer, including the abuse accusation that had been thoroughly disproven. Her legal team fought aggressively to keep this information out of the trial, but they lost. The court allowed the jury to consider the fact that she had made false claims in the past, which was a devastating blow to her credibility. Jameer took the stand as the prosecution's star witness. He spoke about his relationship with Shannon, their breakup, and the troubling behavior she displayed afterward. He was articulate and presented himself as composed and credible. However, when it was the defense's turn to cross-examine, they highlighted one critical flaw: Jameer had spent years deceiving both Shannon and Danita. Then, the prosecution introduced a crucial piece of forensic evidence: the bullet fragment recovered from Danita's body. While the murder weapon itself had never been found, forensic experts confirmed that the bullet matched the type of gun Shannon had purchased just months before the crime. Shannon also took the stand. She repeated the same story she had told the police, insisting that Danita had forced her to accompany him to Danita's apartment, that she had no idea what was happening, and that she was merely an unwilling participant. She delivered her testimony with confidence, never wavering under questioning for a moment. It seemed like she was holding her own. Then the prosecution revealed what would be her undoing: tape recordings. Shannon had secretly recorded conversations with Jameer after Danita's murder, supposedly in an effort to get him to confess. These tapes had been provided to her defense team, but they had chosen not to use them. That alone was suspicious. The prosecution, however, had no reservations about playing the recordings in court. In the recordings, Shannon could be heard questioning Jameer about what had happened. At one point, he asked who she had been talking to. She denied speaking to anyone, but he continued to press her. Then he issued what seemed to be a chilling threat, warning that if she kept talking, he would find her. The voice on the recording sounded unusually high-pitched, nothing like Jameer's natural speaking voice. The prosecution seized the opportunity, pointing out the discrepancy. Even Danita's friends and family, who knew Jameer well, testified that the voice on the tape didn't sound like him at all. The implication was clear: Shannon had staged the recordings. The prosecution suggested that she had hired someone to impersonate Jameer in an attempt to fabricate evidence and shift the blame onto him. By this point, Shannon's credibility had been completely dismantled. In the end, the jury found Shannon Crawley guilty of Danita Smith's murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As for Jameer, he eventually left law enforcement and pursued a career in financial advising. He moved on with his life, getting married and starting a family. Yet, in the end, no outcome could undo the tragic loss of Danita Smith. By all accounts, she was a remarkable woman with a bright future. She had so much left to accomplish, so many dreams that would never come to fruition. But her memory remains alive, not only through the justice that was served but in the hearts of her family and friends who continue to honor her life. The tragic murder of Danita Smith exposed a tangled web of jealousy, deception, and betrayal, culminating in Shannon Crawley's life sentence for a crime driven by unrequited obsession. While justice was served, it could not restore the vibrant life of a talented photojournalist whose dreams were cut short. Danita's legacy endures through the love of her family and friends, who cherish her warmth and spirit, and in the enduring lesson that truth, however obscured, will ultimately prevail. Toni was the only girl in a family with two brothers. Growing up as the only daughter, she embraced her tomboy side while also embodying the charm of a traditional Southern belle. Being raised in a household of boys made her independent and assertive, allowing her to thrive in male-dominated settings while still exuding femininity and grace. After graduating from high school, Toni decided to further her education by attending college and medical school. She was a dedicated student who excelled, ultimately graduating at the top of her class. Throughout her life, Toni was determined to succeed as an ophthalmologist, becoming a respected doctor. Despite her professional accomplishments, she longed for love and companionship. Although she married young, she quickly realized that the relationship lacked chemistry and compatibility. The divorce was a challenging time for Toni. Eventually, she used her career to help cope with the pain, but over time, she recognized that it was time to open her heart to love once again. At 30, Toni decided to start dating again, but her past experiences made her cautious and reserved. Although she was initially hesitant, she gradually began to open herself up to the idea of love. She met new people and explored possible relationships, but letting go of her past and accepting the idea of true love proved challenging. Like many others, Toni thought online dating could help her find her soulmate. With strong faith being central to her life, she chose to join a Christian dating site in search of a partner who shared her beliefs. During her online dating experience, Toni went on several dates with interesting men, yet she struggled to find someone with whom she genuinely connected on a deeper level. Despite the ups and downs, Toni remained optimistic that she would eventually meet the love of her life. Just when she felt like giving up, she came across Harold Henthorn, a charming and attractive man who captured her interest. His dating profile portrayed him as a confident and successful individual living in Colorado. What stood out to Toni was Harold's sincere desire to find love again after experiencing loss. He revealed that he was a widower, having lost his first wife, Sandra Lynn Henthorn, in a car accident, that he had patiently waited a long time for a second chance at happiness. As Harold and Toni continued their online conversations, Harold decided to visit Mississippi to meet Toni in person. When he met Toni's friends, he easily charmed them with his warm and engaging personality. They quickly recognized that Harold and Toni were a perfect match. His lively nature balanced Toni's more reserved demeanor. From their first meeting, Toni felt a deep connection with Harold, sensing he was her soulmate. Their relationship developed rapidly. By Valentine's Day 2000, Harold proposed to Toni with a beautiful ring. Overjoyed, Toni accepted, excited to start this new chapter with her Prince Charming. Less than a year after they met, on September 30th, 2000, Toni and Harold got married in a beautiful church ceremony in Mississippi. After the wedding, they moved to Colorado, where Harold lived. Toni quickly became a skilled doctor, treating her patients with the care and attention of family. Her exceptional bedside manner ensured that every patient felt heard, understood, and cared for, reflecting her compassion and commitment to her profession. Toni's life centered on her career as a doctor and her relationship with Harold. Together, they created a warm home, supported one another. As the years went by, they welcomed a daughter, Haley, who brought immense joy to their lives. Time passed, and Toni Henthorn and her husband Harold continued to build a fulfilling life together. Just 2 weeks before their anniversary, Harold contacted the office manager at Toni's ophthalmology practice. Eager to assist, the manager listened as Harold shared his plan for a surprise. He wanted to take Toni to Rocky Mountain National Park to celebrate their 12th wedding anniversary. Understanding how passionate Toni was about her job and her patients, the office manager ensured that Toni's schedule remained open. On September 28, 2012, Harold visited Toni's office. The office manager led Toni into an exam room, expecting her to see a routine patient. To her surprise, she found her husband Harold waiting for her. Harold had a surprise. They were going on a weekend getaway. He reassured Toni that he had arranged for a babysitter for their young daughter, Haley, and had already packed her bag. Toni happily agreed to the unexpected trip. As they began their trip, Harold let Toni know that their first night would be spent at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, which inspired Stephen King's novel, The Shining. When they arrived at the hotel, they enjoyed an early dinner before heading to their room. Harold had carefully planned trails for them to explore the next day. On September 29, 2012, they set out to hike in the beautiful Rocky Mountain National Park. Their day started off peacefully, filled with excitement about the stunning views and the promise of a wonderful day outdoors. While America's national parks are celebrated for their breathtaking scenery, they also come with hidden dangers. A study by Backpacker magazine reveals that, on average, 243 people die in national parks each year, underscoring the risks involved in wilderness exploration. In Rocky Mountain National Park, falling was the leading cause of death. As time went on, Harold and Toni moved further into the Rocky area. Just before 5:54 p.m., Harold made a distressing call to 911, sounding panicked as he told the dispatcher that Tony had fallen off a cliff and was in critical condition. The dispatcher quickly sent a park ranger, who was also a trained EMT, to help. However, the ranger had to walk through difficult terrain to reach Harold. While on the phone, Harold urgently pleaded for a helicopter to rescue Tony, but the dispatcher explained that a helicopter couldn't reach them because of the high altitude and challenging terrain. Although the dispatcher tried to reassure Harold that help was on the way, he could sense Harold's fear and desperation. After a while, Harold ended the call because he was worried his cell phone battery might die, leaving him unable to call for help. As the ranger searched the park, the sun began to set, creating a creepy atmosphere. To help the ranger find him, Harold decided to start a fire. About an hour after his first call, Harold reached out to emergency services again. This time, the dispatcher tried to guide him through CPR to save Tony's life, but Harold insisted on hanging up, saying he needed to keep the line open. While the ranger continued looking, the dispatcher called Harold again and asked him to use his whistle to help the ranger locate him. Harold blew the whistle to signal that he was nearby. Unfortunately, by the time the ranger and emergency services arrived, more than 2 hours after Harold reported Tony's fall, it was too late and Tony had already died. All deaths in national parks are carefully investigated, and this case was no different. Harold told the ranger about the hike that led to Tony's tragic death. He mentioned that at 1:45 p.m., he and Tony started their hike on the Deer Mountain Trail and stopped to take a selfie. The trail was crowded with many hikers, so they moved deeper into the woods. Harold said they reached their destination around 3:30 p.m. and had lunch on the mountain. He took a photo of Tony during this time. However, the area where they had lunch was too noisy for them to enjoy their meal, so they decided to head further down the mountain to find a quieter spot. Harold shared that Tony had seen wild turkeys and wanted to get closer to photograph them. Unfortunately, she fell 128 feet down the mountain while trying to take pictures. After Tony's tragic death, Harold returned home to a wave of support from family and friends. His daughter, Haley, was profoundly affected by her mother's passing. She also received a lot of love and support from those around her. However, amid the sympathy, rumors began to spread about the nature of Tony's sudden death. Tony's friends found it strange that she had died only a year after nearly losing her life in a previous accident. A year before, while cleaning under the deck, Harold had accidentally struck a loose beam, causing it to fall on Tony's head. She was rushed to the hospital but luckily survived, despite suffering bruises and injuries that took time to heal. Given this history, Tony's friends began to wonder if there was something suspicious about her death. They questioned whether the earlier accident was genuinely accidental or if there was more to the story. On the day of the funeral, people grew suspicious when Harold seemed more focused on watching a football game than grieving for his wife among family and friends. The FBI began investigating Tony's death. Agents interviewed the ranger who first arrived at the scene the day Tony died. The ranger reported that there was no evidence Harold tried to perform CPR on his wife. Further investigation revealed more concerning details, including that Harold's cell phone sent signals from the area where Tony fell 9 times. These signals led investigators to suspect that Harold might have scouted the location with the intention of killing his wife. The FBI received a call indicating that Tony was not the first wife of Harold. This discovery raised concerns about Harold's potential involvement in the death of his previous wife. Lynn and Harold were married in September 1982 and lived in Colorado. On May 6, 1995, shortly after 9 p.m., a woman and her family were driving on Highway 67 in rural Colorado when they noticed a man in the street signaling for help. It was Harold Henthorne. He appeared anxious and quickly approached their vehicle, asking for assistance. Harold explained that his wife, Lynn, was trapped under their car. He claimed that while they were fixing a flat tire, the jack had collapsed, pinning Lynn underneath the vehicle. The woman and her family quickly jumped in to help lift the car off Lynn. As they worked, they saw that her lips were blue and she wasn't breathing. It was a frightening sight, especially in the cold weather. Lynn was only wearing a tank top and jeans, leaving her vulnerable, in need of warmth. Recognizing how serious the situation was, the woman and her family immediately took action. They placed their coats over Lynn to help keep her warm. Since it was the mid-1990s, there were no cell phones nearby. After driving 2 miles, the woman who assisted Harold found a house with a phone. She quickly called emergency services to report the urgent situation. The dispatcher confirmed that help was on the way, but emphasized that time was critical. When the police officers and paramedics arrived, they gave Lynn a shot of epinephrine to restart her heart. Fortunately, this worked, and her heart began beating again. She was then taken to a nearby hospital for more treatment. Sadly, despite this initial improvement, Lynn passed away at the age of 37. While Lynn was receiving treatment, one of the EMTs attempted to gather information from Harold. However, Harold was uncooperative and kept distancing himself from the medic, making it hard to obtain the necessary details. The medic found Harold's behavior strange. He did not seem anxious or concerned about his wife's condition. From these observations, the medic concluded that Harold did not appear to care genuinely for Lynn's well-being, which raised doubts about his intentions. When medics successfully restarted Lynn's heart, Harold appeared shocked, possibly even disappointed. Despite the freezing weather, he didn't take off his jacket to cover his injured wife, which puzzled the medics who expected him to care for her comfort. Meanwhile, bystanders seemed more focused on helping Lynn than supporting her husband, adding to the medics' confusion. An autopsy revealed that Lynn died from asphyxiation. This finding led to an investigation into her sudden death. However, a few days later, the medical examiner determined that her death was accidental and closed the case. At that moment, no one suspected that Lynn's death was anything but straightforward. The case was considered resolved, and there were no signs of foul play. Detectives investigating Tony's death in 2012 hired a private investigator to look into Lynn's death, which had occurred several years earlier. The investigator found that Harold had given inconsistent accounts regarding how Lynn ended up trapped under the car. In some instances, Harold claimed Lynn was looking for a lug nut when the accident happened, while in others, he said she was trying to retrieve a flashlight she had accidentally dropped. Harold also changed his story about their plans at the time of the incident. Sometimes he said they were about to go out for dinner, and other times he claimed they had already eaten and were heading home. Investigators stated that they found some inconsistencies in Harold's story and decided to examine his relationship with Tony more closely. A family nanny, Schott, reported that Tony and Harold slept in separate rooms and that Harold occasionally traveled for work. He would go on these trips, but he didn't bring any luggage, and then he just showed up the next day, Schott said. She wondered if Harold was having an affair. He seemed to have a secret life. They also encountered difficulties in finding concrete evidence of his fundraising activities, which were not available online. Local authorities and journalists also received 17 anonymous letters highlighting the fact that Harold's first wife, Lynn, was crushed under their car while he was changing a tire on the side of the road, according to Harold. Authorities ruled it an accident, but when Tony also died, family, friends, and investigators noticed striking similarities. They mentioned that he had also taken out insurance on his wife and found that he had received $600,000 after Lynn died. Investigators noted that Harold had taken out 3 $1.5 million insurance policies on Tony during their 12 years together. After Tony's death, their daughter Haley stated that Harold tried to control her reactions after informing her of what had happened. According to Haley, this controlling behavior continued at home. She mentioned that she had to ask for his permission before she could have a snack or play with a toy. At a bail hearing the following week, a judge denied Harold bail, declaring him a substantial flight risk because he still had access to a large sum of money, including Tony's assets. While Harold was in prison, Haley was adopted by her mother's brother, Barry, and his wife, Paula. Harold insisted that he frequently traveled for work, but further investigation revealed that these claims were false. The agents found no tax returns, pay stubs, or any evidence showing that Harold had been employed since 1995. This discovery raised doubts about Harold's reliability and increased suspicion regarding his activities. On November 6, 2014, 2 years after Tony's death in Rocky Mountain National Park, Harold was arrested and charged with murder. He pleaded not guilty. Meanwhile, Tony's family wanted to take custody of Haley, Tony's daughter, but Harold, who was in jail, denied their request. 10 months after Harold was arrested, he went on trial in 2015 for the murder of his second wife, Tony. Although there was no forensic evidence linking him to her death, the prosecution presented several pieces of evidence to build their case. First, they highlighted that Harold had taken out multiple life insurance policies on Tony, suggesting that he had planned to kill her for financial gain. They also provided evidence of cell phone activity in the area weeks before Tony's death, indicating that Harold was searching for a discrete location to carry out his scheme. Additionally, the prosecution showed a map found in Harold's car, marked with a large X at the location where Tony fell from the cliff. They argued that this map demonstrated Harold's intention to use this spot to execute his plan. The prosecution's strongest evidence focused on the circumstances surrounding the death of Harold's first wife, Lynn, which raised suspicions. The striking similarities between Lynn's death and that of his second wife, Tony, led the jury to believe that Harold had a pattern of behavior indicating his guilt. After a 10-day trial, the jury deliberated and found Harold Henthorn guilty of murdering Tony Henthorn, concluding that the similarities between the two cases pointed to his responsibility. Consequently, Harold was sentenced to life in prison, where he will remain for the rest of his life. Although he was never charged with Lynn's murder, many believe he is also culpable for her death. In December 2015, custody of Haley, the daughter of Tony and Harold, was granted to Tony's oldest brother. In 2023, Harold Henthorn attempted to appeal his conviction, but the appeal was dismissed. He also filed for post-conviction relief, claiming ineffective assistance from his defense attorney. Harold contended that his attorney failed to meet constitutional standards and was not adequately prepared for the trial. However, the court rejected his request for relief, determining that his attorney had provided a sufficient defense consistent with constitutional requirements for a fair trial. Harold Henthorn's unsettling story serves as a powerful warning about the risks posed by people who seem charming. His talent for charming and deceiving others underscores the need to be cautious and skeptical when dating or forming relationships. This case is a cautionary tale for anyone in similar situations, urging them to be careful and reach out to trustworthy people for support. In May 2023, police in Spain received a troubling call from a peaceful neighborhood in Torremolinos. Inside one of the apartments, they found the body of a young woman who had been stabbed multiple times. The suspect managed to escape but was caught a few hours later at a nearby cafe. However, this tragedy was just the starting point for a string of discoveries that connected to a case that had remained unsolved for 9 years. Behind the wall of a different apartment, investigators uncovered evidence that stunned even the most seasoned forensic professionals. In 2011, Sabora Gagani lived with her boyfriend Marco Gayo Romeo in a small house in Torremolinos, Spain, close to the beaches. On the surface, their life appeared stable. Sabora worked as a waitress, and Marco was a chef. She frequently called her mother, Elisabetta, to reassure her that everything was fine. However, beneath this facade of stability were serious issues that became more apparent over time. When Elisabetta visited, she could immediately sense the tension in their home. Arguments between Sabora and Marco happened even in front of her. Elisabetta noticed that Sabora often tried to excuse Marco's jealousy and anger, attributing them to temporary difficulties. Yet, Elisabetta believed that their problems were much deeper than everyday challenges. Just 2 years ago, Sabora was a very different person. Sabora was born on September 14, 1991, in Albania. She was known for her vibrant and cheerful nature from an early age. After her parents divorced, her mother, Elisabetta, relocated with her children to Rome, Italy, where they began anew. Sabora quickly became well-liked by her peers, earning the nickname Tibby because of her lively and warm personality. Despite facing financial difficulties, she was determined to help her family. She began working as a waitress at a young age but never lost sight of her dreams. Her natural beauty, slim figure, and success in a local beauty contest opened doors to the modeling industry. However, her greatest aspiration was to become a teacher, as she truly loved working with children. Things started to change when Sabora turned 18. At a cafe, she met Marco, a 31-year-old man whose charm and confidence immediately attracted her. At that time, she knew very little about him. He was divorced, had a sister, and seemed eager to start anew. However, beneath this appealing exterior was a troubled past. Marco had a reputation for aggressive behavior and issues with substance abuse, which had led to multiple encounters with the police. Despite these red flags, Sabora was drawn to his charisma and chose to ignore the warnings. A year into their relationship, Marco proposed that Sabora move with him to Spain, claiming that there were better job opportunities there than in Italy. Elisabetta tried to convince her against it, expressing doubts about Marco's intentions, but Sabora was determined. She believed this move would be the start of a new chapter where she and Marco could create a happy life together. Initially, Spain seemed like a great opportunity for Sabora and Marco. Sabora quickly secured a job as a waitress, while Marco found work as a pizza chef. They rented a cozy home, and Sabora shared her hopeful plans with her mother. Unfortunately, their stability didn't last long. Marco started losing job after job, often blaming his employers for his failures. His frustration and jealousy intensified, leading to a rise in his aggressive behavior, which escalated from small disagreements to serious conflicts. When Elisabetta visited Spain to check on Sabora, she was taken aback by the situation. Sabora, once vibrant, confident, now appeared withdrawn and subdued. Marco showed his irritation openly in Elisabetta's presence. Their arguments became louder. Despite these significant issues, Sabora continued to defend Marco, reassuring her mother that everything would get better. Those who knew Sabora were confused about why she ignored the warning signs in her relationship. She may have looked to Marco for the support and stability she missed during her childhood. When her family moved from Albania to Italy, they faced many challenges. Elisabetta worked hard to create a better life for her children, but Sabora had to take on adult responsibilities at a young age. Her relationship with Marco seemed like a way to fill the emotional gap, but instead, it added more stress. Life in Spain was becoming increasingly difficult for Sabora as her youthful dreams faded away. In July 2014, Sabora Gagani vanished unexpectedly, leaving her family in despair. The last time she was heard from was through a text message to Marco, her ex-partner, on July 7th. After that, her phone was off, and her social media accounts were inactive, which was not typical for her. Earlier, Sabora had told her mother she had finally broken up with Marco, moved into a new apartment, and felt a sense of freedom. She compared it to a butterfly emerging from its cocoon. However, her abrupt silence worried everyone. The situation became even more puzzling when Marco showed up unexpectedly at Elisabetta's home in Italy. He tried to act like a concerned and remorseful man, claiming to care about what had happened. While having coffee, he told Elisabetta that he had no idea where Sabora might be. Marco explained that they had argued shortly before she vanished, and she had left without taking her belongings. However, he later changed his story, saying that a security guard at their apartment complex had seen Sabora leaving with 2 suitcases. These inconsistent statements raised more suspicions and increased worries. Elisabetta remembered that just a few days before, Sabora had decided to end her relationship with Marco for good after 3 years of attempts to fix things. Despite her efforts to distance herself from him, Marco remained persistently involved in her life. In early July, he unexpectedly called Elisabetta to ask if Sabora had returned to Italy. This question seemed strange to Elisabetta, especially considering Sabora's recent breakup and her repeated attempts to cut ties with Marco. Her mother recalled that, before, in 2013, Sabora had even gone back to her mother's home in Italy to leave everything behind, had realized that there was no future for her and Marco. However, Marco refused to let go. He traveled to Italy to see Sabora, begging her to give him another chance and promising to change, even proposing to her. Ultimately, exhausted by their turbulent relationship, Sabora succumbed to his promises. Unfortunately, the same cycle of jealousy, control, and aggressive behavior soon returned, disrupting her peace once again. At one point, Sabora told her mother that if she ever left Marco for good, she might have to disappear completely because she feared he wouldn't let her go. In the following months, Sabora made frequent trips to Italy, likely because her Spanish residency permit had expired. There were reports that she may have used a fake Italian ID for these travels. Elisabetta noticed her daughter appeared more and more scared, but Sabora rarely provided details about her situation. She only mentioned she was looking for a way to escape her troubles. Her family realized something was seriously wrong. Sabora would never cut off contact with them, especially with her mother and brothers. Now, all they could do was wait and hope that Sabora had chosen to go into hiding to escape Marco's grip. However, the conflicting stories and complete silence from her only raised more concerns. By 2015, the investigation into Sabora's disappearance had not made significant progress, despite the efforts of her family and law enforcement. Her mother, Elisabetta, was determined to file an official report with the authorities. She strongly believed that Marco, Sabora's ex-partner, was involved, as he was the last person known to have seen her before she disappeared. His behavior during the investigation only deepened suspicions. When questioned, Marco stuck to his story, claiming that Sabora left their home after an argument, after that they lost contact with each other. However, many of her personal items, including clothes and identification, remained in the apartment, which was strange. Despite his claims, Marco never reported her missing to the police. Instead, he claimed he tried to find her himself by printing and distributing flyers in their neighborhood. He also provided conflicting theories about where she might be, suggesting at one point that she had traveled to Argentina or had been seen with an unknown man with whom she allegedly had a confrontation. These statements were inconsistent and lacked credible evidence. Elisabetta, feeling distrustful of Marco, took matters into her own hands to find her daughter. She contacted the media and a specialized organization that helps raise awareness about missing persons cases. As a result, photos of Sabora and requests for information started appearing in both Italian and Spanish news outlets. However, these efforts did not lead to any new information. While Sabora's family continued to search for answers, Marco seemed to be living a fairly normal life. He changed his appearance by shaving his head and growing a beard, likely to avoid drawing attention. During this period, he entered into 2 new relationships, both of which ended due to the women complaining about his aggressive behavior. Nevertheless, Marco stayed in Spain, frequently going to the gym and joining a shooting club, which concerned those who knew his background. Sabora's family refused to lose hope. Elisabetta continually urged the police to step up their investigation. As a response, law enforcement began reviewing the case files to identify any overlooked details. They paid close attention to Marco's statements, which had seemed inconsistent from the start. Moreover, there were questions about why he hadn't contacted the police immediately after she went missing. As time went on, public interest in Sabora's case decreased. Despite her family's relentless search for answers, Marco, who was still in Spain, seemed to adapt to life after her disappearance. To his neighbors, he seemed friendly, focused on fitness and socializing. However, concerns about his character lingered due to his past relationship with Sabora and complaints from his new partners. While Sabora's family held on to hope for updates, the investigation remained stalled. Authorities broadened their search using international missing persons databases, but these efforts produced no leads. For those who knew Sabora well, the uncertainty about her fate was agonizing. By 2023, Marco seemed to have changed his life for the better. He was now living with a new partner, Paula, and they had a child together. Yet, beneath this seemingly fresh start, the same problems that troubled Marco for years persisted. His relationship with Paula was unstable. She confided in close friends and co-workers about experiencing physical abuse from him. During this time, Marco had difficulty maintaining a steady job, which made their financial situation worse. Over time, Paula became more aware of the challenges in Paula and Marco's relationship. She felt that Marco was not only aggressive at work but also unsupportive at home. Despite Paula's efforts to create the appearance of a normal life, her struggles were becoming apparent. For Paula, her primary goal was to save enough money to leave Marco and fight for her children's custody. Marco's situation was getting worse. He often told his master about his financial problems, stating he was working only for his family's sake. However, his aggressive behavior at work and inability to get along with coworkers made his master wonder if keeping him employed was worth the hassle. Meanwhile, Paula's friend noticed how serious Paula's situation was and encouraged her to stand up against the mistreatment. Despite this, Paula was too afraid to take any confrontational action. She confided in her friend that Marco had hit her 4 times and kicked her, but she minimized the seriousness of these incidents. This indicated that Paula needed immediate help. On Tuesday, May 16, 2023, Paula enjoyed her day off, excitedly sharing her plans for a relaxing evening with her coworkers. However, the next day, May 17, took a tragic turn. Around 11:30 a.m., loud shouting came from the apartment that Paula shared with Marco. Although arguments were common between them, this time it sounded much more severe. Paula's voice was clearly heard, calling for help. Victor, Marco's landlord and boss, could hear a loud disturbance coming from her apartment. Worried, he hurried over with a co-worker from the restaurant. When they arrived at the door, they began knocking and shouting to find out what was going on inside. They heard soft sobbing, which then stopped abruptly. Shortly after, Marco opened the door, appearing calm, and told them everything was fine, saying Paula had just gone to bed. However, the absence of Paula's voice made Victor uneasy. This situation was particularly alarming given recent events. Just days earlier, Victor had fired Marco after a series of troubling incidents, including the mysterious disappearance of a kitchen knife. Victor had begun to distrust Marco and wanted to prevent any further issues. Now, Marco was involved in another troubling situation. While Victor went to get a spare key to the apartment, the co-worker called the police. Marco, seeming to recognize that the situation was getting serious, remained calm but acted unexpectedly. He suddenly left the apartment and walked out of the building without explanation. When the police arrived, they found the apartment locked. Victor soon returned with a spare key and entered the apartment to investigate further. Inside one of the rooms, they discovered Paula's body on the floor, stabbed 14 times. Her clothes were drenched in blood, and it was clear she had died several hours prior. The police secured the crime scene and called in forensic experts to gather evidence. They also began searching for Marco, who had fled the scene. Meanwhile, Paula's body was sent for an autopsy to determine the exact cause of death. Just a few hours later, Marco was found sitting calmly at a cafe table. He did not resist arrest and appeared unfazed by the situation. On May 20, 2023, 3 days after Paula's tragic death, Marco appeared in court. He was charged with a crime involving aggravating circumstances related to gender-based violence. The court ordered a psychiatric evaluation and substance testing. Marco was denied bail and remained in custody during the hearing. He chose to stay silent, only speaking to respond to his lawyer's questions. There was no mention of Sabora Gagani. However, just a few days after his arrest, Sabora's case gained attention again. Marco then made a surprising confession while being interrogated at the police station. He stated that during an argument in 2014, he had killed Sabora and hidden her body in the apartment they shared. Despite his confession, law enforcement decided to focus on the investigation into Paula's death first and postponed verifying Marco's claims about Sabora. Elisabetta, Sabora's mother, was devastated by the news of Marco's arrest and his admission about her daughter. For 9 years, she had advocated for a reopening of the investigation, convinced of Marco's involvement in Sabora's disappearance. Marco's confession led to the official reopening of Sabora's case, prompting investigators to validate his statements, starting with a look into the apartment where he and Sabora had lived in 2014. By early June 2023, Spanish investigators concentrating on Sabora's case meticulously examined the building layout where she and Marco had lived. A notable detail emerged: there was a large space that should have been part of the bedroom according to the building plans, but it was missing in reality. After receiving permission, investigators entered the apartment on June 6 and broke through the wall. They found a large wooden box filled with lime. Inside the box, police discovered important evidence: a plastic bag containing a knife with dried blood and personal items believed to belong to Sabora. Among these items was a wilted bouquet of flowers on top. The box also contained several plastic bags, one of which had a camping sleeping bag that held human remains. These remains were sent for forensic analysis to identify the person and determine the cause of death. To confirm the identity, Spanish authorities requested DNA samples from Sabora's family in Italy. On June 10, police visited the home of Sabora Gagani's mother, Elisabetta, to collect a saliva sample. The DNA results confirmed that the recovered remains belonged to Sabora. In the week that followed, new information about Marco's actions came to light. During interrogations in Spain, he claimed to have tried to dispose of the body using acid, but this claim could not be verified. Investigators observed that Marco often changed his statements. For Elisabetta, the confirmation of her daughter's remains was heartbreaking. After 9 years of uncertainty, she felt her hope had been taken away, although she had never stopped seeking answers about what happened to her daughter. Over the years, her life had changed significantly. Sabora's father passed away from illness without ever discovering the truth about his daughter. Although her efforts ultimately led to answers, they also brought a bittersweet feeling of closure. Forensic experts are continuing to analyze the evidence collected from the location where Sabora's remains were discovered. A knife found in a plastic bag has been sent for testing to check for biological traces that might connect it to Marco. At the same time, Spanish investigators are working with their Italian colleagues to gather additional materials related to Sabora's disappearance. Although there is evidence against him and he initially confessed to being involved in Sabora's death, including disclosing where her remains were located, he later took back his confession. Marco's lawyer claims that his statements were made under pressure and should not be accepted as evidence in court. Nevertheless, investigators argue that the items found in a hidden box, including Sabora's personal belongings, give them solid grounds for pursuing further charges. The investigation into Paula's death is still active, with Marco as the main suspect. In January 2024, several months after the discovery of Sabora's remains, her family was finally able to hold a burial after all forensic examinations were completed. Her remains were returned to her loved ones in Italy, where friends and family gathered to say their final goodbyes. As a tribute, they released balloons into the sky, each carrying heartfelt messages of hope and farewell. Meanwhile, significant attention was on the ongoing legal case against Marco, who was facing charges related to Paula's death. During a hearing on January 30, 2024, Marco presented a handwritten 17-page letter admitting his responsibility for Paula's death, but he included many conditions. He stated that the conflict stemmed from ongoing arguments about shared debts and her infidelity. Marco claimed that he used excessive force in self-defense during the altercation, which led to the tragedy. Marco admitted certain things about Paula, but he was unwilling to give detailed information about Sabora's case. He confirmed that he wrapped her body in plastic, placed it in a wooden box, covered it with flowers, added lime, and sealed it in a wall. However, he insisted that he was not responsible for her death, claiming that his actions were driven by fear of the situation. During the trial, Marco changed his story about how Sabora died, providing a completely different account. He claimed that the Albanian mafia, which he said he was involved with due to debts, was the one who killed her. According to Marco, he had borrowed €25,000 to start a brothel, but the money was stolen. When he couldn't repay the debt, he said 4 men came to his house, and during an argument, one of them killed Sabora. Marco stated that he was then threatened with his own life and forced to dispose of her body to avoid more trouble. This version of events raised serious concerns among investigators because Marco had changed his statements multiple times during the investigation. It became clear that he had lied to mislead authorities. There was no evidence to support his claims of mafia involvement. An autopsy revealed that Sabora had died from multiple stab wounds, indicating a violent crime. Sabora's family finally learned the truth about her fake years after she was reported missing. Her mother, Elisabetta, shared that she had spent the last 9 years hoping for answers. By May 2024, the trial for Paula's case was in progress, and the court moved forward with a jury trial to address charges of domestic violence and homicide. Meanwhile, Sabora's case had been reopened but had not yet gone to trial, as investigators continued to examine Marco's claims. Further court proceedings were expected. The experiences of Sabora Gagani and Paula illustrate the harmful effects of relationships characterized by manipulation and abuse. Sabora had aspirations for a promising future, while Paula was working to regain control of her life. Both women were negatively impacted by the same individual. Their stories remind us of the crucial need to identify the early signs of abusive behavior and take action to prevent further harm. Teenage years can be a particularly vulnerable time in a person's life. During this period, individuals transition from childhood to adulthood. They might appear innocent and carefree, but they often hold on to secrets, maybe out of fear or embarrassment. Sometimes, not feeling able to share their struggles with a trusted parent or loved one can lead to serious consequences. The case of Justice Garrett, who was only 16 when her life was tragically cut short in 2018, has shocked Florida. For her mother, it was a heartbreaking realization. She had not recognized or understood the struggles her daughter was facing. Justice Marie Garrett was born on March 23, 2002, and is the eldest daughter of Danielle Pratt and Stanley Garrett. Justice spent most of her childhood and teenage years in New Smyrna Beach, a small town in Volusia County, Florida. In 2016, her parents divorced. Justice lived with their mother. A year later, Danielle started dating Robert Nixon Kern Jr. By the fall of 2017, Danielle moved with her daughters to Sorrento, Florida, a tiny rural town with a population of just over 1,000. They settled into Robert's house. Justice faced significant challenges after moving and struggled to adjust to her new surroundings. She missed her close friends who stayed in New Smyrna Beach, felt the difficulty of transferring schools in the middle of the academic year, and was unhappy with her new home and her mother's partner. Despite her frustrations, Justice remained respectful, tried not to cause any issues. Known for her friendly and humorous personality, she quickly made friends at her new school, especially forming a strong bond with a classmate. The two girls became nearly inseparable, with Justice often staying at her classmate's house, and they even referred to each other as sisters on social media. On Friday, April 13, 2018, Justice overslept and missed her school bus. In her rush to get ready for class, she skipped breakfast. That day, her younger sister, Devon, was ill and stayed home, while their mother was preparing to take Devon to the hospital. Justice chose to take a public bus to school, which was only a few stops away. She packed her backpack, said goodbye to her mother, and left the house. That was the last time anyone saw Justice alive. When Justice didn't return home from school at the expected time, her mother, Danielle, wasn't worried. She thought Justice had gone to her friend's house, which she often did after class. When Justice had missed school on Friday, and her phone had been off for almost 2 days, Danielle felt a surge of panic. After trying several times to reach her daughter without success, she hurried to the local police station to report her missing. The search for Justice began right away. When the officers found out that Justice had only moved to the area 6 months ago, they thought she might have gone back to her old town to visit friends for the weekend. Authorities believe that teenagers sometimes leave home suddenly, either in rebellion or for other reasons, and they thought Justice would likely return soon. However, Danielle firmly believed that her daughter wouldn't have left so far without telling her first. The initial step was to identify Justice's friends and find out if she had a boyfriend, any recent conflicts, or other relevant information that could clarify the circumstances of her disappearance. Justice left home without any money, and all of her personal items were still there. Her phone lost signal shortly after she departed for school. Her social media accounts showed no activity since late Thursday night, and she didn't reply to any calls or messages. None of her friends knew her whereabouts, as she hadn't been in touch with anyone. Justice was not drinking alcohol or using banned substance. She was not in a relationship and had never had serious romantic involvement. Justice surrounded herself with positive influences, had no conflicts with others, and had a clean legal record. Teachers at her school spoke highly of her. Her classmates viewed her as kind, compassionate, and sweet. The police quickly checked all local crime reports, incidents, and traffic accidents throughout the area. They considered the possibility that she might have been involved in an accident and was unable to communicate. However, there were no records of her being involved in any such events. Using data from her phone, investigators were able to track her movements on the morning she disappeared. Around 7:30 a.m., Justice left her home and began walking toward the school. Approximately 15 minutes later, her movements became unusual. She stopped for a moment and then abruptly changed direction. Shortly afterward, her phone was turned off. Justice's disappearance sparked rumors and speculation throughout the small, quiet town, where little ever happened. Any incident quickly became the center of attention, spreading through gossip and often embellished with falsehoods. On April 17th, for days after Justice went missing, a man alerted the police about a disturbing discovery he made in a wooded area outside of town. An experienced runner, he often jogged along a secluded trail that passed through a park and into the forest. That morning, while exploring the woods, he was struck by a strong, foul smell that seemed like decay. At first, he believed it was just the remains of a dead animal and thought about reporting it for removal. However, his curiosity led him to investigate the smell further. He stepped off the trail and walked approximately 15 feet into the underbrush, where he found a shocking sight: a severely decomposed human body, unrecognizable in appearance. Based on the long hair and pieces of clothing, it looked like a young woman. Her pants were pulled down to her ankles, her shirt and bra were pulled up around her neck, and her hoodie was tied tightly around her head. He quickly called the police and waited on the trail to avoid disturbing any potential evidence. When the officers arrived, they carefully examined the area and the remains. It was evident that this was a violent crime scene and the victim was a young woman. Her clothes were torn and her undergarments were missing, suggesting the crime was both abuse and aggressive. There were visible bite marks on her legs, probably from wild animals, but the most severe injuries were inflicted by a corrosive chemical. This substance had damaged her face down to the bone and had also been poured on her chest, lower abdomen, and private areas. It was clear that the perpetrator intended to disfigure the victim and remove any DNA evidence, which was unfortunately successful. From the beginning, investigators believed that the body discovered in the woods was that of Justice, who reported missing a few days earlier. However, due to significant chemical damage and decomposition, DNA testing was necessary for confirmation. Unfortunately, the Garrett family's fears were confirmed: Justice had been found dead. Her remains were located approximately 30 minutes away from her hometown. Evidence indicated that she had endured severe beating prior to her death, as her nose, cheekbone, and several ribs were fractured. Because of the advanced decomposition, the exact cause of death could not be clearly identified, but it was thought to be due to mechanical asphyxiation. The man who found the remains provided important information to the police during his interview. He shared that he often jogged along the same path every other day. 2 days before discovering the body, he had seen a suspicious man coming out of the woods near where Justice's remains were later located. Although the witness could not give a detailed description because he only saw the man briefly from behind and from a distance, he described him as a short, stocky white male dressed in jeans and a black hoodie. The man quickly left when he realized someone else was nearby and vanished behind the trees. At the time, the runner found the encounter strange but didn't think much of it. There was no noticeable smell of decay that day, so he pushed the incident from his mind. However, after he found the remains 2 days later, he remembered the unusual man on the trail and reported it to the authorities. Detectives quickly suspected that the unknown person in the woods could be the criminal behind the crime. They thought he might have returned to the scene to hide evidence. Experts identified the chemical used on the body as chlorine bleach. This, combined with the area's humid climate, sped up decomposition and made the remains unrecognizable. The jogger was eliminated as a suspect after passing a lie detector test and giving a strong alibi for the day Justice went missing. Justice's mother stated that her daughter intended to take a public bus to school that morning. However, security camera footage showed that Justice never arrived at the bus stop. A neighbor reported seeing Justice get into a car belonging to her stepfather, Robert. This information shifted the investigation's focus, prompting detectives to question Justice's parents again to understand why they hadn't been honest. Danielle, Justice's mother quickly admitted that her partner, Robert, had recently lost his driver's license temporarily. Since Justice was running late that morning, he decided to give her a ride. Danielle had kept this information secret to avoid causing issues for Robert. At the time of the first interview, Justice's body has not been found yet. She thought Justice was still alive and would return home soon. Detectives quickly requested surveillance footage from cameras near the school to verify Robert's account. However, the recordings showed that Robert had neither dropped Justice off at school nor anywhere close by. His car was not seen on any cameras along the route to the school, raising questions about where they had gone. This indicated that Robert was likely the last person to see Justice alive. When questioned again, Robert confessed that he had driven Justice that morning despite having a suspended license. He explained that she had begged him not to take her to school but to the nearby town, where she allegedly had a meeting with a secret boyfriend. Robert claimed he did not know the name of this person and initially refused to take her, but eventually relented to her requests in an effort to improve their strained relationship. Justice had asked him not to tell her mother about this trip, assuring him she would return on her own later that day. She also said that since it was Friday, she planned to spend the night at a friend's house. Robert agreed, not seeing anything unusual or concerning about the situation. This new information brought a potential suspect into the investigation, a secret boyfriend. Investigators needed to find and identify him quickly, as he could either be connected to Justice's disappearance or, at the very least, might be the last person to have seen her alive. Law enforcement started their investigation by examining Justice's contacts and social media activity since her phone was still missing. They confiscated her laptop, which led to even more questions. Justice had several accounts on different social media platforms, where she regularly communicated with friends from both her real life and the online world, but no signs of romantic relationships or a boyfriend were found. One particular account, however, appeared strange and suspicious. Investigators concentrated on this profile to identify its owner and determine if it was linked to Justice's disappearance. A young man named Kevin had been increasingly interested in Justice Garrett over the past few months. He messaged her every day, liked her posts, and complimented her photos. However, Justice appeared uninterested. She seldom replied, often ignored his messages, and showed no intention of keeping in touch. Justice's friends later revealed that she had talked about a persistent admirer who frequently messaged her on social media, but she found him more bothersome than charming. Kevin's profile indicated that he was 2 years older than Justice and lived in the same town. The profile included only a few pictures of an athletic and attractive young man, but none of Justice's friends or family had ever met him in real life. Eventually, it was uncovered that the account was fake, with the photos taken from the internet. Experts promptly accessed the account and traced its creation. The investigation showed that the account didn't belong to a teenager but was linked to an adult man named Robert. Justice's stepfather was brought in for questioning. Detectives wanted to know why he had created a fake account to communicate with his stepdaughter and why he hadn't mentioned it before. Robert seemed taken aback that investigators had discovered his link to the account, but he quickly regained his composure and provided an explanation. He stated that he had created the account to help boost Justice's self-esteem, suggesting that as the new girl in town and at school, she might enjoy getting compliments from a seemingly attractive young man. Justice was new to the area, but she quickly fit into her school and made many friends. Recently, however, her close friends noticed changes in her behavior. The cheerful and carefree teenager became more tense and nervous. Although she didn't share the reasons for this change, she often stayed at her best friend's house. Justice spent so much time there that it felt like she had moved in, yet she never told her best friend what was bothering her. Her best friend observed that Justice's stepfather came by her house several times to pick Justice's up. Each time, Justice appeared anxious, tried to avoid going with him. She would call her mother, pleading to stay a few more nights at her friend's and promising to finish her chores, focus on schoolwork in return. Danielle typically agreed to her requests. Robert and Justice reportedly had a difficult relationship from the beginning, a fact known to her friends. However, Justice never claimed that he was aggressive or acted inappropriately, and no one around her, including her mother, had witnessed anything concerning in Robert's behavior towards his stepdaughter. As doubts about him grew, Robert became as the primary suspect in the investigation into Justice's tragic death. Police took him into custody for more questioning while also investigating his background and lifestyle. Robert, 43 years old, had a troubled past with the law, including convictions for burglary, banned substance possession, and violent incidents. His criminal record made it very difficult for him to find stable employment, so he sometimes worked illegally as a carpenter at a local sawmill, taking on odd jobs to get by. Detectives were now trying to piece together Robert's troubled history, his behavior towards justice, and the events surrounding a horrific crime. Robert had hidden his past from everyone, including Danielle, who was unaware that she was living with someone who had a criminal background. When investigators uncovered the truth about him, Danielle was shocked and finally spoke out. She revealed that Robert had offered to drive Justice to school that day, even though Justice had expressed his reluctance. When Justice did not come home, Danielle became worried. However, Robert reassured her that Justice was staying overnight at her best friend's house. He even told her not to call the police or contact her friend. Investigators looked into Robert's devices and found that in the months before Justice disappeared, he had repeatedly searched online for information about substances that could make a person unconscious or immobile. He had also explored ways to buy such substances on the dark web and seemed to have successfully made a purchase. Robert didn't stop there. He looked into ways to remove DNA evidence from a body, using common household items like bleach and disinfectants. He even examined satellite images of wooded areas near DeLand, where Justice's body was ultimately discovered. It was apparent that Robert had been carefully planning his crime for months, intending to hide the body and eliminate all evidence. His motive was increasingly clear. He had developed an unhealthy obsession with justice and believed that the only way to fulfill his disturbing desires was through violence. To evade the legal repercussions for his actions, he resolved to kill her. Investigators cleared up their suspicions about Robert's involvement by examining the geolocation data from his phone on that day. He drove away from their home with Justice toward her school, but then suddenly changed direction and stopped in a remote area. At this point, it's believed that Robert may have used a chemical, possibly chloroform, to incapacitate Justice. He then turned off Justice's phone. His vehicle was monitored as it traveled to the location where it remained for about an hour. This time frame would have provided him enough opportunity to assault Justice, physically harm her, strangle her, and hide her body in the woods. From 8:12 a.m. to 9:17 a.m., Robert's phone remained in the area where Justice's body was eventually found. On that day, he carried a small bottle of a chlorine-based substance, which he poured over her face and other areas to eliminate possible evidence. However, Robert became anxious, worrying that he might have left traces behind. 2 days later, he came back to the scene with a large container of bleach, poured it over Justice's head, chest, and lower body in a final effort to destroy any evidence that could connect him to the crime. That morning, the attacker revisited the crime scene and was seen by a jogger. The jogger later found Justice's body and reported it to the police. Kern's alibi quickly unraveled. Although he worked unofficially at a local sawmill, he had asked 2 co-workers to falsely claim he was on time that day, when in fact he was almost 2 hours late. When questioned further, both co-workers admitted the truth after being warned they could face charges for lying and hiding evidence in a violent crime. Robert denied all the charges, but the evidence against him was overwhelming, leading to a trial. Witnesses described Justice as living in fear during the final months of her life, often avoiding her home. Despite her struggles, she never expressed her fears, not even to her mother. Danielle, caught up in her love for her new partner, didn't recognize the danger and never asked Robert about his past. Prosecutors thoroughly disproved Robert's statements, showing he had carefully planned the crime with the intent to kill Justice. Forensic evidence, such as moss and soil samples from the location where Justice's body was found, matched particles found on his car mats, strengthening the connection to the crime scene. However, allegations of abuse assault could not be definitively proven because the DNA evidence and tissue samples had been destroyed by a corrosive chemical that he used, which eroded the victim's remains. In August 2022, almost 2.5 years after the crime, Robert Nixon Kern Jr. was found guilty of premeditated violent murder. He received a life sentence in prison without the possibility of parole, meaning he will never be released. The tragic murder of 16-year-old Justice Garrett on April 13, 2018, in Sorrento, Florida, exposed the hidden dangers of teenage vulnerability. Justice's silent struggles, unnoticed by her mother, Danielle, underscore the critical need for open communication and vigilance to protect teens from unseen threats, ensuring her loss inspires lasting change. The Jansen family appeared to be a loving and supportive unit, like many other families. However, one day, everything changed dramatically. An unexpected event occurred in their home. This incident triggered a chain of events that devastated the family and shocked those around them. Law enforcement, friends, neighbors all sought to understand how this seemingly perfect family could unravel what actually happened behind closed doors. In the dense forests of British Columbia, Randy Jansen led an ordinary life in a small town called Langley. Known for its brick storefronts and cozy coffee shops, Langley was viewed as a peaceful haven. Randy experienced years of hard work and unfulfilled dreams that often brought him unhappiness. From a young age, Randy had a strong bond with his father, who worked at a local lumber mill. His father taught him the skills of woodworking. After graduating high school, Randy followed in his father's footsteps by securing a job at the same mill. The job was tough, requiring long hours and significant physical effort, but Randy was used to hard work. In Langley, the lumber mill was seen as a vital part of the local economy and way of life. For more than 10 years, he committed himself to the challenging routine of processing wood and transporting logs. Although the work was repetitive and tiring, it provided him with stability. Each day might have seemed the same, but Randy found meaning in the rhythm of his work and his role in the community. The lumber mill represented stability in Randy's life, while music served as his escape, a way for him to express emotions he often found difficult to put into words. Since childhood, music had been important to him. Over time, playing guitar and singing shifted from being just a hobby to a crucial outlet for his feelings. Randy often performed at a local bar in Langley, where residents gathered to relax after their long workdays and enjoy live music. On stage, he transformed from his usually quiet self into an engaging and energetic performer, captivating his audience. The townspeople appreciated his heartfelt performances, which were filled with authenticity and passion. At a local bar one ordinary evening, Randy met Laurel, a woman who would profoundly impact his life. Laurel, 6 years older than Randy, worked as a bartender and often watched his performances from behind the bar. She was confident, charismatic, well loved by the patrons for her ability to create a welcoming atmosphere and her friendly demeanor. What began as casual chats about music and life quickly developed into a deeper bond. Their mutual love for music and shared aspirations brought them closer. Laurel played the piano and, although her life had taken a different path, she had always dreamed of pursuing a professional music career. This common dream, paired with genuine interest in each other, soon evolved into something much more significant. Life at the lumber mill went on as usual for Randy, but everything changed with Laurel's presence. Their relationship grew stronger as they started planning their future together. Although Langley felt familiar and comfortable, it began to seem too small for the aspirations they had. They dreamed of a life where music could be more than just a pastime. They wanted it to be the core of their future. Randy's days at the mill, his nights performing at the bar, and his evenings with Laurel filled him with a sense of purpose, love. He hoped for what lay ahead. Randy and Laurel frequently looked back on their wedding day in 1990. It was a modest ceremony with just their closest friends and family, creating a warm and intimate setting. The event featured live music, including a special song that Randy sang for Laurel, marking the start of their loving journey together. A few years later, their daughter Emily was born. She quickly became the center of their family. Randy often expressed how Emily was the best thing that ever happened to him. Anyone who knew them could see the deep love he had for her. Emily was only 8 years old when her life changed drastically. She started suffering from severe headaches that were so painful she could no longer participate in her music activities. From a young age, Emily had a natural talent for singing, which amazed her parents and earned her awards in competitions. She was living a lively life, taking vocal lessons and dreaming of becoming a singer. Her parents, encouraged by her success, did everything possible to support her dreams. Initially, Randy and Laurel struggled to understand their daughter's condition. They visited multiple doctors and underwent numerous medical tests, but none provided clear answers, leaving them confused. Emily had to leave school and start home-based learning because the bright lights and loud noises in classrooms worsened her severe headaches. Her room turned into a dim sanctuary where she spent most of her time. Randy and Laurel took turns caring for her, trying their best to alleviate her pain and offer comfort during her difficult times. After thorough medical evaluations, the doctors diagnosed Emily with migraines. This news deeply affected her entire family. The medications they prescribed provided only slight relief, easing her pain a little but never completely stopping the headaches. The music she previously cherished, which brought her so much happiness, was now unattainable. Once a vibrant and energetic young woman, Emily began to withdraw, spending most of her time in silence, darkness. Randy and Laurel were determined to find a solution for their daughter's condition. They explored numerous treatments, consulted many specialists, and looked into alternative therapies, but nothing provided the lasting relief they had been hoping for. The medical outlook was bleak. Migraines are often chronic, and many people suffer from them for life. Statistics revealed that around 53% of migraine sufferers cannot drive because of their symptoms, 30% find it difficult to finish their education, and 34% encounter issues in maintaining employment. Although these figures indicated that Emily's situation was relatively common, they offered little comfort to her parents, as they witnessed her once vibrant spirit fade. Randy went through a really tough time during these years. Music, which had once been his escape, now reminded him painfully that Emily could no longer share in the joy it brought her. Playing guitar in the evenings felt empty without her voice alongside him, and performing at the local bar, which used to be a source of joy for him, no longer felt fulfilling. He began to spend more time at home to support Emily as much as he could. However, as her condition worsened, both Randy and Laurel felt increasingly powerless. Their vibrant daughter, who was once full of life and determination, now isolated herself in her room, avoiding the world and its noise. Randy continued to work, but his thoughts were constantly with Emily. Each morning, he hoped to find a way to relieve her suffering. By the time Emily turned 18, her condition had worsened significantly. Her migraine episodes became more frequent and intense, sometimes lasting for several days. This constant pain made it difficult for her to study and maintain friendships. Despite these obstacles, Emily remained determined. She enrolled in the Fine Arts program at the University of British Columbia, aspiring to become an opera singer. For Emily, going to university was not just about academics. It was an opportunity to regain a sense of normalcy and pursue the life she had always dreamed of. Despite feeling physically exhausted and experiencing frequent pain, Emily committed herself to staying active. She took vocal lessons, learned music theory, studied art history and literature. She also participated in student events and concerts whenever possible. Her classmates admired her determination to engage in university life despite the challenges she faced. However, beneath this outward involvement, Emily was battling significant struggles. She frequently had to miss classes and catch up on her studies alone. The strong medications prescribed for her migraines left her feeling tired, drowsy, and weak. Her treatment plan included triptans, anticonvulsants, and antidepressants to help manage her symptoms. But these medications also had serious side effects, such as depression, difficulty concentrating, and a decline in her overall health. Over time, Emily chose to limit her medication intake as much as possible to lessen its effects on her body and began exploring alternative ways to manage her condition. Emily focused on meditation and breathing exercises, used cold compresses on her head, and stayed away from bright lights, strong smells, and loud noises. Her room became a safe space where she could escape anything that increased her pain. During her worst migraine episodes, she would sometimes stay in complete darkness for entire days, while her parents took turns caring for her and doing their best to alleviate her discomfort. Despite these challenges, Emily worked hard to maintain a sense of normal life. She kept in touch with her friends, even though she couldn't see them as frequently as before. Sometimes, she had to cancel plans at the last moment due to sudden migraine attacks. However, her friends remained supportive, visiting her at home and spending time with her to ensure she didn't feel alone. Despite her challenges, Emily remained committed to the things she loved. Her desire to return to music and live a fulfilling life never faltered, even as the journey became increasingly difficult. On May 7, 2015, Randy shocked everyone in his life with a Facebook post. He revealed some unimaginable actions he had taken in the prior 10 days. He started the post by expressing his love for his daughter, Emily, whom he described as an exceptional daughter, talented, intelligent, and kind. Emily brought immense joy to their family, filling their home with laughter and always willing to assist others, even while facing her own struggles. Unfortunately, her illness had robbed her of so much, forcing her to give up dreams she had worked tirelessly to achieve. Emily had been experiencing migraines since elementary school. The persistent pain caused her to fall into deep depression, making it common for her to endure days without relief. Randy observed how his daughter watched her classmates enjoy normal lives while she spent her time in hospitals or isolated in her dark, quiet room. Despite her efforts to hope for a brighter future, nothing seemed to alleviate her suffering. Randy worked at a lumber mill, but when he wasn't working, he dedicated all his time to Emily. He often told his friends that she was his whole world and that he couldn't bear the thought of life without her. Watching her in pain and feeling powerless to help was pushing him toward despair. Friends noted how Randy shared his struggles with them, making it evident how deeply he was affected emotionally. In this Facebook post, he confessed to taking a gun and ending Emily's life, explaining that he did it to free her from her constant pain. He described his vision of her as an angel soaring above the clouds, her long hair flowing in the wind, finally at peace. But he didn't stop there. Randy also revealed that he had taken the life of his wife, Laurel, because he couldn't bear the thought of her enduring the heartbreak of losing their daughter. A few days later, he also ended the life of his sister, Shelley, claiming he wanted to spare her from the shame of his actions. In the post, Randy shared Emily's journey in her battle against illness, highlighting her incredible strength and resilience. Unfortunately, despite her efforts, the illness had taken its toll. Randy expressed his helplessness as he watched her suffer daily, knowing he couldn't change her situation. He often told friends that he would do anything to support Emily, and ultimately, he felt this was the only way to help her. At the end of his Facebook post, Randy mentioned that his family was now in a better place, free from suffering. He expressed sorrow for his actions, took full responsibility, and apologized to anyone he had hurt. The post closed with the haunting phrase, "Rest in peace, my little family." After Randy's post went live, his friends and acquaintances immediately alerted the police out of concern for Randy's family. They were shocked by the content and wanted to ensure everyone's safety. Law enforcement acted quickly after receiving several calls. Officers were sent to Randy's home to look into the matter. One of Randy's closest friends, Brian Jones, was filled with fear and confusion as he read the Facebook post. Initially, he hoped it was just a mistake or a cruel joke. However, when he saw the signature, Daddy-O, Hugs and Kisses, a nickname Randy had used since school, Brian understood that Randy had truly written those words. This left Brian in shock and disbelief. He had always seen Randy as a kind and caring person, deeply devoted to his family. The thought that his friend could commit such an act or even possess a firearm was unfathomable to him. Brian remembered how lovingly Randy spoke of his family, making it difficult for him to grasp how things had taken such a tragic turn. The seriousness of the situation struck him immediately, and he knew he needed to respond quickly. He left work early and made his way to Shelley's house, trying to call Randy as he went. Each unanswered call only increased his worry. When Brian got to Shelley's house, he saw a pile of undelivered newspapers on the porch. This was unusual because Shelley was always dependable and took her responsibility seriously. Her old van was in the driveway, the curtains were tightly shut. The yard was eerily silent, with no signs of life. Brian knocked on the door multiple times, but no one answered. The atmosphere felt unsettling and unnaturally quiet. Shelley had become a private person after her parents died. She lived by herself, had no children, and hardly spoke to her neighbors. Her primary job was delivering newspapers, and she was recognized for her reliability, punctuality. When Brian noticed the newspapers piled up without being picked up, he became worried and called the police. The dispatcher told him that he wasn't the only one worried about the family. A patrol unit was already on its way to investigate. When the police arrived, they tried to reach Randy Jansen, who was inside his house. They saw him through a second-floor window with a gun. The officers used loudspeakers and attempted to call him, but Randy did not reply. Understanding the seriousness of the situation, the officers proceeded cautiously to prevent further escalation. The house was surrounded, and negotiators began their work, but Randy did not show any intention to surrender or communicate. After several hours, the situation became much more critical. Randy set the house on fire, and officers saw smoke rising from the upper floor. They tried to get inside, but the flames spread too quickly, blocking access through the windows. Officers noticed a body wrapped in a sheet on the first floor, but they couldn't reach it to confirm its identity. Within minutes, the fire took over the entire house. When firefighters arrived, the house was fully engulfed in flames, and they could not save it. Investigators discovered 3 bodies in the charred remains of the house on Lanberis Road in Rosedale. 19-year-old Emily was found in her bedroom, wrapped in a sheet. 50-year-old Laurel was located in the kitchen, covered with a blanket. Both women had suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Randy's body was located in a second-floor bedroom. He had died by suicide using a firearm and setting the house ablaze. The positioning of his body and the presence of the weapon indicated that Randy was experiencing severe emotional distress when he made the choice to end his life. When police arrived at the home of Randy's sister in Langley, British Columbia, they found her body in the living room. She had been shot twice in the head and was covered with a blanket. No signs of a struggle, indicating that Randy had likely caught her by surprise. Over the past year, Emily's health had worsened significantly. Doctors had to give her morphine injections to manage her severe pain, and these were used as a last resort. Neighbors often witnessed her parents assisting her into their home after her hospital visits. Emily was so weak that she required help to walk, which was heartbreaking for everyone who knew the family. Randy Jansen, Emily's father, dedicated himself to caring for his family despite facing numerous challenges. A year prior to the tragic events, he sought assistance from their family doctor due to ongoing insomnia and intense stress. He shared his struggles with witnessing his daughter's pain. The doctor suggested using sedatives and advised Randy to focus on getting more rest, but Randy refused the medication, feeling it wouldn't truly solve his problems. Brian noted that Randy had never indicated any thoughts of self-harm or intentions to harm others. He described Randy as a calm and hardworking individual always willing to help. Randy consistently put his family first, so no one could have anticipated he was capable of such actions. Brian observed that Randy had reached his breaking point. He could no longer endure watching his daughter suffer, which led him to make a heartbreaking decision. Neighbors who had known Randy since he was a child found it hard to reconcile this event with the kind and gentle person they remembered. They noted that he had never shown any signs of aggression or cruelty. His actions appeared to stem from a sense of desperation and an inability to cope with the immense pain affecting his family. One neighbor recalled Randy saying that if his daughter were to die, he wouldn't have a reason to live. Emily's last tweet, posted just 4 days before the tragedy, stated, "I complain about the pain, but at least I'm here to feel it. I thank God for the chance to live." In Emily's Twitter account, she wrote, "For the first time in 2 years, I've gone 12 hours without pain. I'm so tired of hurting, but I need to keep going." Her resilience was clear, despite the immense challenges she faced. This message expressed her determination to cherish life despite the significant suffering she faced. Her social media posts often reflected her struggle to stay positive in the midst of her illness, highlighting her hope even when times were tough. Emily was remembered as a kind and caring young woman who made an effort to stay connected with her community. She loved music and sang at the local church whenever her health allowed. Many residents of Langley have fond memories of her performances, but as her health declined, she was able to attend church less often. Despite her challenges, she remained generous and thoughtful, baking with her mother, sharing treats with neighbors. On her good days, she also helped local children with their homework. Laurel, Emily's mother, did everything possible to support her daughter. In a Twitter post, she expressed her feelings, saying, "Emily is back in the hospital, praying to God they can help her. I feel so helpless." These words showed the deep pain and despair she experienced while watching her daughter suffer. Although Laurel was emotionally drained, she was determined not to give up and continuously sought ways to improve Emily's condition. Similarly, Shelley, Randy's sister, could not predict the tragedy that would occur. The family never imagined their lives would be changed in such a devastating manner. Over the past year, Randy often shared with friends the heavy burden and stress he felt due to Emily's illness. No one could have predicted that he would eventually become so emotionally fragile that he would consider harming his family. Randy struggled to manage the emotional strain. Despite their shared despair, the family attempted to support one another, but their situation continued to worsen, leading to an unforeseen and tragic outcome. With the details now revealed, it is obvious that feelings of despair, hidden challenges, and deep hopelessness led to an unexpected tragedy. The story of the Jansen family serves as a sobering reminder that even within seemingly stable homes, deep pain can linger just beneath the surface, occasionally breaking out in unpredictable ways.